الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: الإيمان يماني والحكمة يماني.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to everyone who's watching, and hello to the Christians and the Jews in the chat, or potential Jews. The Jews haven't turned up as of yet, but the Christians have. So anyway, hello to both you people, our cousins in faith. So alhamdulillah, here we are again in episode, well, technically it's episode 2, isn't it? But the first real look at the Old Testament. We've covered the question of what is the Torah, and we've gone through displaying from all three faiths what people believe and what can be evidence in terms of what the Torah is. And we've concluded in our previous stream that in fact the Jews and the Christians believe that the Torah isn't actually what it is from their own evidences, as well as from the Quran, you know, getting rid of this whole Islamic dilemma issue. But today, you know, me and the brothers from Dots Connected to Islam, we're here to have a deep dive and a good look at Genesis 1 and 2. So first and foremost, assalamu alaikum to you, brothers.
Wa alaikum assalam
wa rahmatullahi.
How's everyone doing?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so inshallah, before we get started properly with this project, I do want to recite something from the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 103, وَقَالَتِ الْيُهُودُ لَيْسَتِ النَّصَارَ عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَ لَيْسَتِ الْيُهُودُ عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابَ كَذَلِكَ قَالَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ مِثْلَ قَوْلِهِمْ فالله يحكم بينهم يوم القيامة فيما كانوا فيه مختلفون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the Jews say that the Christians have nothing to stand on, and the Christians say the Jews have nothing to stand on, although they both recite the scriptures. And those pagans who have no knowledge say the same about the people of faith. Surely Allah will judge between them on the day of judgment regarding their dispute. And I want the viewers, inshallah, to bear this verse in mind, because as we have seen in the previous episode and in this episode and throughout this long project and this series, we will constantly see that the Jews and the Christian will constantly differ regarding the Torah, despite them both reading what is in it, giving the truth and approving the statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes in the Quran. At the end of the day, first and foremost, this is for the purposes of da'wah. This is not to trash your beliefs. This is not to just deflect from the Quran, because we allow the discussion of the Quran within these streams. And considering this is we're still doing da'wah, we want to look at Tawheed. And indeed, there is no better place in the Torah to start with regards to Tawheed than speaking about Genesis 1 and 2, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and God refers to him as himself, identifies himself in the singular, Echad. So I'll pass it on to Andre, inshallah, to kick us off. To you, Andre.
All right, no problem, inshallah. You guys are hearing me good?
All good.
Okay. Echad, the word for one. So there's a dispute about what the word for one means, Echad. As we know from the Torah, God introduces himself as Echad, one. But what does that necessarily mean? Well, there's a different understanding between Jews and Christians. Christians view the word Echad to be a word that symbolizes a compound unity, while Jews simply hold it to mean one, singular, one. Which one is correct? Within Genesis 1 and 2 itself, and we'll get there when we go to the context, Christians quote passages from Genesis 1 and 2 to say that echad is a compound unity. But that doesn't make sense. The word echad in and of itself is not where the compoundness is derived from. For instance, if I say one cluster of grapes, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that the number one is always such a compound thing. The word one is compound because of what follows, the cluster. So the compoundness is not derived from the word. It's derived from the context. Similarly, how we teach our kids to count, we start from the number one. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. If you have children, that's exactly how you teach them to count. For people who speak Hebrew, it's exactly that. It starts with echad. Within the Bible, we see many examples of the word echad being used, and it has nothing to do with compound unity, at least not in the sense that Christians believe the Trinity is. For instance, when it says in Genesis 1:5, the first day, the word there is echad. Or in Genesis 11:1, when the people say that the world was one language, that is echad. Or in Deuteronomy 17:6, where it says that you should never put someone to death over the testimony of one witness. That word is echad. Now, if Christians want to say that that type applies to the Trinity, then they have become partialists, because the day is parts of the day are evening and morning. So it's very clear that the word echad in and of itself does not mean compoundness. That would be yachid, which is different from echad, right? So the word echad itself does not necessitate compoundness. It's what follows that necessitates it. And that's just how it is. In the same way that we say there's one of something, or the numeral one in English, it's the exact same for Jews. So when we see that God identifies himself as echad within these passages, we can understand that does not point to a concept which is foreign to Tawheed. It points directly to it. Echad does not mean compound, it means one. And that is what we believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And mashallah. And the thing is, it's not just that, because we see a very different, manifestation of who who God is in Genesis, between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, because we see him being identified as Elohim, which is a proper name in Genesis 1, aligning with Echad, whereas in Genesis 2 there's a very different story. But we'll let Brother Fawad expand on that, inshallah.
All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brother Faisal, can you click on that slideshow that I sent you?
Let me do that.
And of course, while this is being brought up, once we make our case, we will be opening the floor to the Jews and the Christians specifically, to be able to challenge the case that we have put forward.
All right. Can you make it bigger, please? Start with the first slide.
Fawad, I don't think I have right permissions on this. This is
just
not
one second. Yeah, I'll actually do that. Why is that not? Okay, then I would have to share it on my own. Slideshow. Wait. Okay, so. Tell me when this. Problem is, I don't know how I will actually look at my notes.
Fawad, let me try something.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a second.
Okay.
Wa alaikum wassalam to everyone in the chat. How is everyone doing?
Alaikum assalam to everyone in the chat.
I've made a copy of this, so
Okay.
All right. So I should be able to present it.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Brother Yamni, can you bring it up?
Sure. There we go.
All right.
All right. Perfect. All right. Bismillah. So in our introductory stream that we did the last time on dissecting Tanakh, I did mention the different hypotheses that critical scholars and source critics have come up with over the last few centuries to resolve the problems that we find throughout the Old Testament. Now, although these scholars may differ with each other and some may prefer one hypothesis over the other, most contemporary scholars, they prefer to use a hybrid model as compared to just one, sticking to one hypothesis like they used to do back in the day. Having said that, they do agree undoubtedly on the following, that there are irrefutable discrepancies, hence the different hypotheses being proposed to reconcile these issues. Second, that the authors are completely unknown and definitely more than one in case of Pentateuch and the rest of the books as well. With the exception of hardcore Jews or Christians, it is impossible to find any critical or source critics that believe that there is only one author for the Pentateuch. And finally, there is a definitive influence of different cultures, traditions, and pagan religions found in these texts, which we'll be expounding on later on, inshallah. So let's take a look at how source critics have tried to reconcile these issues. Next slide, please. So one of the popular hypotheses being proposed to reconcile these issues is the supplementary hypothesis. In this model, the Pentateuch began as a single document, possibly the priestly or the Yahweh source, which the scholars refer to as the P source or the J source. And over time, editors, or also referred to as redactors in the scholarly circles, which are just editors, basically added more material to it over time. The key proponents of this model are Johann Acorn from the late 18th century and later expounded upon the likes of John Setters and Rolf Rentorf and Hans Schmidt, etc., in the 1970s. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
The second hypothesis being the fragmentary hypothesis, which is getting more and more popular these days in this, the critical scholar circles and the source critics. This model suggests that the Torah is composed of numerous independent fragments that were pieced together over time. It integrates various traditions, stories, and laws which were collected and assembled to create the final text as we see it today. The key proponents of this hypothesis are the likes of William Henry Green, Alexander Geddes, and John Vatter, among others. Next slide, please. And finally, we come to the documentary hypotheses. And in this hypothesis, we will see how the source, in the source critical circles, they've been using this for a couple of centuries. The pioneer of this hypothesis was a Portuguese scholar called Baruch Spinoza from the 17th century. His works were later examined by other scholars, and the person who popularized this hypothesis the most was a German biblical scholar from the 19th century called Julius Wellhausen.
Wellhausen. Yeah.
Yeah, Wellhausen. So according to this hypothesis, the Pentateuch was created by merging independent documents from 4 different sources, namely the Yahwists, denoted by the letter J. It emphasizes on God's name as Yahweh. That's where the source gets its name from, of course. Their texts adopt a narrative style and portray God in a highly anthropomorphic manner. This source is believed to have originated from the southern kingdom of Judah around the 10th century BCE. Then we have the Elohists, denoted by the letter E. They refer to God as Elohim, throughout their text. They emphasize prophetic figures and depict God as a more distant deity. This source is believed to have originated in the northern kingdom of Israel around the 9th century BCE. Then we've got the priestly source, denoted by the letter P. They have a more of a formal and legalistic depiction found in the text. They focus on genealogies, cultic practices, and is said to be composed during or after the Babylonian exile period, around the 6th century BCE. And finally, we've got the Deuteronomists, denoted by the letter D. This source is almost all linked to the book of Deuteronomy and pushes for the worship only in Jerusalem. It is said to be written perhaps during the King Josiah's reform period, around 7th century, 6th to 7th century BC. Next slide, please. So the scholars have arrived at this conclusion based on a set of criteria that they outline, including the following. The first, the variations in God's names and how God is depicted throughout these texts. The doublets, i.e. the repeated stories of the same events but told differently. The internal contradictions or inconsistencies. The literary style and vocabulary being used in the Hebrew language in these respective sources. Anachronisms, by the way, for those that don't know what anachronism means, anachronism is something placed in the wrong time period, like a modern item or an idea proposed in a historical setting. An example would be showing a smartphone, or a laptop or something in a movie setting in the 1800s. That would be considered anachronism, right? Then we've got the historical and cultural differences found throughout these texts. And lastly, similarities to other pagan religions that they have found in these sources that predate the Pentateuch.
Yeah.
Now let's,
yeah. Before we move on, because obviously now we have this criteria, which is very important, because this is where what we are presenting sort of hits all of these notes, right? So we spoke about echad and how that is unique to God and it's unique to being one, whereas Yachid is a compound one. And we can see in Genesis 1 that Elohim is the name being used, which denotes the priestly text. Now, which is the very first point, the variation in God's names and depiction. Now, what we see in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is a stark difference, because Genesis 1, we have Elohim being the name, right? That's the name of God. Whereas in, Genesis 2, the first part of Genesis 2 is not so much the Yahweh's tradition, because it goes from Genesis 2:4 onwards. So from 2:4 onwards, a primary example will be verse 7, where it says Yahweh Elohim. So Elohim is then relegated to being a title of God rather than the name of God, as opposed to Genesis 1, where Elohim is the name of God. And this is actually how Jews actually take it. Elohim is a name of God, but Genesis 2 doesn't actually use it in that way. It uses Yahweh as the name of God, displaying the differences between the priestly and the Yahwehist tradition in this doublet, because we see Genesis 1 and 2, they are both the Genesis story. So again, to tie in back to what we said in the previous stream is, what is the Torah? Because are you seriously going to tell us that the Torah was revealed in such a manner that it told us the Genesis story twice? And to coincide it again with the literary style, we have Genesis 1, which is quite orderly, whereas Genesis 2 is not as much, creating contradictions and inconsistencies. So there's a lot here that we can unpack, and we will be unpacking them, but this is just to give people and the Jews and the Christians like a way to follow the conversation, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Now, let's explore some examples that illustrate the aforementioned criteria. I will focus specifically on the priestly and the Yahweh sources, as they're the ones relevant to our analysis of Genesis 1 and 2 today. I won't be talking about the other sources. We'll be talking about them in the future streams, inshallah. Next slide, please.
Yep, this is it.
Yeah, that's the one. So As I mentioned in the previous slide, the literary style and vocabulary used in these individual sources are extremely different. For instance, if we look at how the verb creation in Hebrew is used there. So in Genesis 1, all the way till the next chapter, Genesis 2:4a, which is accredited to the priestly source, uses a very unique term, bara, in Hebrew, which is used exclusively with the deity creating. While Genesis 2:4b onwards, all the way to even the next chapter. But as I said, we'll only be discussing chapter 1 and 2, right? So towards the end of the chapter, we see that it's as according to scholars, it's being accredited to the priestly source. It uses I mean the
Yahweh,
Yahweh source, sorry, till the end of the chapter, which is a credit to the Yahweh source. It uses a more common Hebrew terminology for creation, which is asah, right, which means to make or do, or yetzer is another term that is being used over there, which means to form or shape, right? Then the term used to identify genders, right? In Genesis 1:1 all the way till the second chapter, verse 4, um, uses uncommon words for a male and female, zakar and nekeva, right? While in Genesis 2:4b all the way to the next chapter, we see that it uses the Hebrew term ish or isha for female, for instance, right? Next slide, please. Now, how about God's name in the Hebrew language? How is that used in Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2? The priestly source uses the word Elohim for God, like Brother Yemeni mentioned, right? While in Genesis 2, the Tetragrammaton Yahweh is used throughout. As you may notice, at the bottom, I have added a note about the name Yahweh. We're told in Exodus 6, verse 3, that God tells Moses that although he appeared to the patriarchs, namely Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he never revealed his name, Yahweh, to them. While we see that starting from Genesis 2, the name Yahweh has been used all throughout. Could that be an inconsistency in the narrative, or an example of an anachronism, or both? Take your pick. Next slide, please.
Just to clarify for the audience, this is not to say that Exodus 6:3 is a cross reference to Genesis 1 or 2. Is just to highlight that the name Yahweh is not something known to the patriarchs or the prophets. In fact, God actually doesn't identify himself or name himself Yahweh when revealing his name to the prophets. Whenever you see Yahweh, it's always almost in a third person sense, right? It's never in the, like, God identifying himself and saying, to a prophet, I am Yahweh. So this is essentially what we're saying. Is it because, as we know, these traditions, because at the end of the day, as we mentioned before, the Dead Sea Scrolls is the earliest extant documentation of the Old Testament that we have, and that comes about after the Tikkun Seferim, right? When the restored text that was done by Ezra and that was discovered in Second Kings. So we are looking at the Assyrian and the Babylonian traditions. This is after that stuff, right? This is when we actually have extant work. So this is why the question of anachronisms, is that what's happening? Is that being back projected to what was originally given to Moses? And of course, Ali's going to touch on this even more as after Fawad touches in terms of the Near Eastern traditions and how it has influenced the text and theology. Sorry.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. No, not at all. Actually, that's very important that you pointed that out. And just in case if somebody wants to then point this out, we do have the Ketef Hinnom scrolls that predate, but that's just a scrap. It only has like Numbers chapter 6, like 2 verses on there or something.
Yeah. Doesn't count.
It doesn't count. It's just a scrap. Yeah. But anyway, so okay. So then let's take a look at some other internal inconsistencies between Genesis 1 and 2 in the creation story, right? Starting with the order of creation. In Genesis 1, we see that it has, and the order goes like this. The vegetation comes into creation, then we've got the animals, then the humans, male and female, getting created together. In Genesis 2, on the other hand, the order is completely different, with the man being created first, then the vegetation, then the animals, and finally the woman. Then we have the method of creation. In Genesis 1, God creates through his speech, while in Genesis 2, God forms man physically with his own hands from dust and the woman from Adam's ribs. What about the humans? How are they created in both chapters? Genesis 1 has the man and woman created simultaneously, while Genesis 2, man is created first and the woman is created later from his rib. The creation of vegetation in Genesis 1, we can see the vegetation is created on day 3 before the humans are created, while Genesis 2 has the man created first, while the vegetation in the Garden of Eden appears after. Next slide, please. Similarly, the creation of animals in relation to humans is also different. As depicted in Genesis 1, animals are created before humans, while Genesis 2 has the animals created after man. Then we have the nature of the world before creation. How is that depicted? In Genesis 1, the earth starts as a watery chaos, while in Genesis 2, the earth starts as dry and barren. Again, very different depiction in both creation stories. And a final example is where what is the purpose of creation in both accounts? Genesis 1 has humans created to rule over the earth, while Genesis 2, the man is created to work and care for the Garden of Eden. Next slide, please. The next criterion on the list that I gave you guys is the cultural influences. Let's take a look at Genesis 1 from the priestly source. Genesis 1 has clear influences from ancient pagan religions, from the Babylonian and Egyptian mythologies. As we saw in the previous slides, how the creation mythology is depicted in the priestly source. It focuses on it starting from a chaos, which finally comes to an order using a distant using a distant divine authority. This closely resonates with the Enuma Elish, which my brother Ali over here is going to expound upon further, inshallah. It reflects the creation of order from chaos, with God creating through his spoken command. Very similar to how Marduk, the chief Babylonian deity, does it in the Babylonian epic. The 6-day creation process and emphasis on the Sabbath, it mirrors the orderly structure in these Near Eastern mythologies as well. So the obvious question arises, how and when did the Jews incorporate these other mythologies into their own text or their own theology? So scholars or historians, they explain this by suggesting that it most likely would have happened during their interaction with these different cultures during the Babylonian exile around the 6th century BCE, while earlier interactions with the Egyptian culture would also explain during the Exodus period that would have also played an important role as well. Babylon, of course, being the modern day Iraq and Egypt. Next slide, please. Now let's take a look at Genesis 2, the Yahweh source. In Genesis 2, it is said to be influenced by the Sumerian and Akkadian mythologies, where the depiction of God is very anthropomorphic as compared to Genesis 1, especially when we analyze the intricate details of different ways in which the creation of humanity from clay is depicted. The idea of the Garden of Eden and its whole setting, God walking with humans, which we will see in the later chapters as well, where God walks directly with humans and this personal relationship he has with humanity, etc. All of this resonates with the mythology of fertility and abundance found in the Sumerian and Akkadian mythologies. This possible interaction and how mythologies crept into the Jewish text would have been in the early settlement periods of Canaan and later during the Babylonian exile as well. The geographic location include Sumer, the southern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and Akkad, the central Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, etc. And I'll leave it at that, and inshallah, Brother Ali will expound upon more of these mythology as to how it is depicted, because sometimes when you actually read them side by side, it's like almost reading the same account. So
yeah, no, 100%. Ali, over to you.
All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And everything about what Fawad was talking about with the Enuma Elish and how it's exposed to the concept of other religions, it's been actually something that a lot of scholars, when they look at the Elish, that's exactly what they say. But from the very beginning, I would like for at least to take it back a step, and I should just talk about what the Mesopotamian religion is. So, but the Yemeni, I sent you a link on the private chat. It would be the second one, the second link.
The second link, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have access.
Oh, no. Okay. I have to give you access to something.
Just let me know when I've got access and I'll click on it.
All right, no problem.
If we remove the previous slide, inshallah, from the back as well. Faisal.
1 second. I almost got it.
Thank you.
All right. I did that. Ali, is that a slide?
It was, you know what? How about this? Let's go for this one.
If you can bring it up, maybe we will be able to control it. Let's try that.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll bring it up and you guys can share my screen.
Sure.
Okay.
Share screen. Here we go. Awesome. Bad timing. Come on. There we go. Awesome. Awesome. So do you guys see it? Can you guys share it?
Loading. There we go.
There we go. Awesome. So, I'm sure you guys, we hear all the time. What is the Mesopotamians? But what is Mesopotamia? So, beginning, Mesopotamia by definition really just
my
means
apologies,
between two.
Can you make it a little bit bigger? Can you zoom in a little bit?
All right, no problem.
Yeah, perfect.
How's this?
Yeah, that's good.
Better.
So Mesopotamia really means between two rivers. So, and the two rivers of which it's talking about the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. So when we talk about the people of Mesopotamia or the Mesopotamians, it's simply referring to the people that are from what is between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. And historically, that has been several nations. So historically, it's been the nation of Assyria, or over here, as you guys can see over here, the nation of Assyria, the nation of Babylonia, and of course, the nation of Elam. And now this, all of these nations predate from the ancient Sumerians, right? So the ancient Sumerians started off living in the area, and then after the end of their reign, splinter groups or from that same people, ended up forming on within that same region, from the Akkadians to the Assyrians to the Babylonians, and of course the Elamites. So the Elamites are of lesser importance, but of course it starts off from the the ancient Sumerians. So they're basically the same people, right? You can stop share my screen now. Let me just stop.
Okay.
Awesome.
So actually,
So this is basically.
Sorry, before you continue, I want people to have their attention drawn to the fact that when Fuad was bringing his presentation, we were talking about the Assyrians and the Babylonians. In the previous stream, we were talking about the Assyrians and the Babylonians in terms of the times of Second Kings and Nehemiah, right? And how that coincides. And even now, when you're talking about the Mesopotamians and how their traditions, and you're going to expound on this a bit more, inshallah, with regards to the influence on Genesis 1 and 2. Again, we have the Assyrians and the Babylonians mentioned. So if people think that we are doing this and there's going to be inconsistencies, you can actually see how the history is actually coalescing to actually back up the research that has been done by the scholars, as well as the primary sources that we are presenting.
So I mean, even in the Bible itself, there's ancient Mesopotamia has a connection to the Bible, as a matter of fact. And just to give you an example of in Genesis 10, Genesis 10 verses 10 to 12, it says the first sentence when talking about King Nimrod, and we can go to that later on. The first sentence of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. And then from that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh. So of course as we understand, Nineveh is also related to the story of Jonah. So there are actually many connections to the nation of Mesopotamia. As a matter of fact, even the forefather Abraham, or Ibrahim alayhi salatu salam, his birthplace was said to have been in Ur. And actually, let me just bring up my let me just share my screen one more time so you guys can understand.
Yeah, sure.
Never mind. So the father Abraham himself has been known to have been from Mesopotamia as well. So let me just move on further. So the nation of Ur, where Abraham was said to have been born, was right here. So he himself is hailing from has Babylonian origins. So, and this is where we the relation starts to form more and more and more, especially throughout the Bible as well. So that's just the simple definition and the background as to Mesopotamia. Now, when we talk about these four people, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, and the Babylonians, or even the Elamites, yes, there are different civilizations. However, because they all hail from the Sumerians, all of them are Sumerians, basically. They all share the same religion, as a matter of fact, even though there are some bits and the different minor differences, but the core foundation of the religion is the exact same, because there are the same people. So, and how do we know that? So we know that through what's called the cuneiform tablets. So the cuneiform tablets are basically, I think I just keep sharing my screen because I keep doing that. Let me just stop doing that. I'll tell you guys when to stop, but let me share my screen one more time so we can actually see what the anomalous is. So can you guys see?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so these are the cuneiform tablets. So the cuneiform tablets are basically ancient clay tablets inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, or it would be their language, the script. That's called the cuneiform script, and these are basically recordings, the code of law, their history, and of course their religion. Now, the cuneiform tablets are said to have been about 500,000 to 2 million tablets that have been excavated and discovered, and about at least around 100,000, 30,000 to 100,000 have been read or published. And the dating of these tablets go back as far, how we're living in the 21st century. The dating of those tablets go back as far as the 22nd century BC. So these are tablets that even long predate the whole story of Moses, and even when Moses was said to have lived historically. And of course, it contains the records, the literature, the documents, and the religious belief. Now, one important tablet, or one important tablet to move on to, is something that Fawad brought up earlier in his presentation, and that's called the Enuma Elish. So Enuma Elish, it's translates to when on high, or when in the height. And the Enuma Elish is the ancient Babylonian or the ancient Sumerian story of creation that was inscribed on the cuneiform tablets. So specifically, these are where the information about their, what we would call them myths, but that's basically their manual, that's basically their Torah, that's basically their Quran in that kind of case, where they would record their beliefs and their religion into it. And the Elish predates the dating of when the Torah is the story, the events of the Torah, talking about beginning from Exodus during the time of Moses. It predates the dating of when the Torah was said to have been written during the time of Moses by more than 400 years. So the events that occurred here predates that. So the claim that the Elish copied from the Torah, that's null and void, basically. And it was discovered by Austin Henry in 1849, and he discovered it actually in modern day Iraq. Well, exactly where Nineveh was supposed to have been. It's the library of Ashurbanipal's Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, and there have been a lot of fragmented Elish tablets that have been discovered, and these are where we have information about the religion of the ancient Sumerians, of the Babylonians, and stuff like that. So let me stop sharing again. All right. So, and why is this important? So all of this is important because it gives us a whole other understanding as to what their belief was and how it's connected to the Torah. So scholars say that the Elish itself, when we look at the story of of creation, it actually matches with the events that occurred in Genesis, and not only, and that's what they would scholars on the Elish will make the case that the Hebrews, when writing the Genesis story of creation, they were inspired. They were inspired and they were influenced by the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and through the Enuma Elish, because when they read it, they see a lot of matching, corresponding topics and even understandings of it. And what I'm going to do now is, for the last time, we're actually going to read the Elish, because fortunately for us, the Elish, whole story of creation, has been translated for us to read and to compare. So, Brother Yemeni, can you please click on the first tab, please?
The first one. Let's have a look. Okay, let's bring this up. There we go.
All right. So can you go all the way down?
There we go. There you go.
All right, awesome. So if we can make it full screen. So what I'm going to do now, so start from verse 1. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to read the first 20 lines, and this is just for pure example, right? And see, while as I'm reading, if you guys find catches or matches of between Genesis 1 and 2 and the Elish. So I'm going to read the first 20 lines. When the heavens above did not exist, and earth beneath had not come into being, there was Apsu, the first in order, their begetter, the demiurge Tiamut, who gave birth to them all. They had mingled their waters together, before meadowland had coalesced, and reed bed was to be found, when not one of the gods had been formed or had come into being, when no destinies had been decreed, the gods were created within them. Lahmu or and Lahamu were formed and came into being. while they grew and increased in stature, Ansar and Kisar, who excelled them, were created. They prolonged their days and multiplied their years. Anu, their son, could rival his fathers. Anu, the son, equaled Ansar, and Anu begat Nudimud, his own equal. Nudimud was the champion among his fathers, profoundly discerning, wise, of robust strength, very much stronger than his father's begetter Ansar. He had no rival among the gods and his brothers. So this is just the first 20 lines of the 7 tablets of the whole story, right? And right then and there's 4 points I want you guys to take hold of, right? The first is the concept of the divine creation, the whole concept of the heavens and the earth, right? And it all goes and it illuminates to the if you guys can go up, so where it talks about Ansar and Kisar. So yeah, so from verse 1 to 12. There we go. So of course, as we can see, when the heavens and above did not exist, this idea and the earth was not this. So it starts off concerning with the heavens and the earth. It did not exist. Does that remind you of anything? And of course, like I said earlier, the reason why it's called Enuma Elish is actually the first 3 words of the Elish, where it says when the heavens. So that's what we get the word Enuma Elish from. Now, in verse 12, where it says before the earth did not exist, and then in verse 12, through Apsu and Tiamut's coming together, verse 12, the concept of Ansar and Kisar, who excelled them, were created. Obviously, the Babylonians practiced a form of polytheism, were multitude of gods, but the definition, the actual meaning of the names Ansar and Kisar, the Ansar was the personification or the concept of the heavens, and Kisar was the concept of the earth. So at this point in time, through the coming together of Ansar and Kisar, so through the coming together of Apsu and Tiamut, now the heavens and the earth were separated, and now they were created. So Ansar and Kisar are the concepts of the heavens and the earth, and now through the coming together, they're now created. And even before that, in verse 3, where it talks about Apsu and Tiamut, Apsu and Tiamut actually represented the waters. So in Genesis, where it talks about the spirit of God hovering over the waters, this whole focus on the water. Now, why is that? Apsu and Tiamut represents this water. The water was together, and when the water separated, what happened? It separated between the fresh water and salt water. This fresh water was Apsu, and this salt water was Tiamut. So, and then all of a sudden, when the waters mingled again, when both waters came back again, that's what caused the separation of the heavens, Ansar, and the earth, Kisar. So this is just this small concept of the divine creation. Talks about this, its focus on the primordial waters, and of course the separation of the heavens and the earth, right? So, and even later on, as we would see if you continue reading, if you continue reading, this concept of the story of the forbidden tree, as we know in as we know when in Genesis 2, where it talks about the creation of man and everything like that, and so this concept alone is resembled in the Elish, and no, it's later on. It's later on. So, but later on, this is just a pure example. But later on in the Elish, where it talks about the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, well, that was something that is derived from the Elish. Why? It's derived from the Elish because when humans were created through the blood of Apsu, Marduk did not want to give the humans knowledge. Why? Because Marduk believed if he gave the humans knowledge, they would be like the gods, and they would rebel against the gods because they would take themselves to be gods, which resembles the story of creation in Genesis, of how Genesis would say the fall, basically, where the serpent tempts Adam and Eve, and they'll say, "Oh, well, eat from the forbidden tree, the knowledge of good and evil. But for if you were to eat, then you would be like God." So this concept alone of being like God through knowledge, that itself is derived through the story of creation, of human creation in the Elish. So, and these are just 2 or 3, 4 examples of the similarities and the correlation between the Elish and the story of Genesis, the story of creation in Genesis. And as we know, like I mentioned earlier, the Elish came first. The concept of the Elish came first. So where would this exposure itself, where would it have come from? Now, as we know, people who read the Bible, as they know, the Assyrians and the Babylonians had an influence on the Jews. And what's one way that what's one obvious way that we can know that? Simple. Conquest. In the Bible, both the Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire conquered the two kingdoms. The Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, whereas the Babylonians conquered the kingdom of Judah in the south. So, as we all know, the idea of conquest itself, it leaves the one who was conquered exposed to the influences, to the mentality, to the thoughts of the oppressors. And as we can see, even when they were trying to recreate it, we can see where the correlation lies. Now, I know what I'm talking about: Apsu and Tiamut and Anu and Ansar and Kisar. Obviously, they are polytheists. However, just and Jews claim it to be more of a monotheistic sense. Just because the Enuma Elish represents a polytheistic faith, that does not mean it can't be or it isn't taken from the concepts of the Elish. Historically, the Jews have been known to conform to the ideology of their environment or their oppressors. Honestly, it's not even just the Jews, it's a historical regularity. As an example, when the Bible talks about the worship of Baal, they were exposed to the religion of those who, the Phoenicians and everything. They would be the ones that would be worshiping Baal. They were exposed to their people, and people started worshiping their gods. That's it. That's an example that's stated in the Bible. And then, of course, we'll get into this later, inshallah. But later on, as in our our breakdown of the Old Testament or the Tanakh, the whole concept of Greek Hellenism. And this will go into the New Testament as well, but we can see that kind of mindset in the Old Testament as well, which Hellenism taking place in the late BC, early AD era through the conquest of Alexander the Great. So we can see that the Jews are known, and they've had historical records of being exposed to conforming, to worshiping, to even taking to the influence of their environments and of their oppressors. Assyria and Babylon would have been no different. Why? Because they were the ones that actually conquered them. Not only did they conquer them, they destroyed their temple and they put them into exile. So the Jews would have been purely exposed to the influences, especially since around that time, the Bible itself talks about how the knowledge of the Torah the people's knowledge of the Torah has been lost during around the reign of King Josiah to where Ezra later on would revive it. Now, the dating of when this would take place was from around 600 to around 400 BC. This itself would match the time around the Babylonian conquest and around where the Assyrians already conquered the kingdom of Israel. And just to give an example, in a pure example of this issue, where the Bible actually itself says it comes from the book of 2 Kings, chapter 22, verse 8. It says, and I quote, "Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord. He gave it to Shaphan, who read it." Now, King Josiah tore his clothes when he learns of this. And so it says, when the king heard the wounds of the book of the law, he tore his robes. Now, the key point is basically, after reading the Torah, they proceed to remove the idols, aspects of adultery. They removed it. And of course, some things took place. Now, why would they need to do that when we're talking about idolatry, which is the first commandment? Why would
Yeah.
it, as if they had no knowledge of this to begin with? Now, why would it's simply because through ignorance, because they would not have known. And even
Agreed.
sorry, you said something, okay?
No, I'm saying, yeah, agreed.
So in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 24, it says, furthermore, Josiah got rid of the mediums and spirits, the household gods, the idols, and all other detestable things seen in Judah and Jerusalem. This he did to fulfill the requirements of the law written in the book that Hilkiah the priest had discovered in the temple of the Lord. Now, why would that be necessary? Why it's all of a sudden as, oh, wait a minute, they read something now. Oh, wait, now we have to change. Now imagine if something that just King Josiah and the people would not have known, how far would that go back? Because if they would not have known it, that means they would not have been taught that by their parents. So their ignorance implies and it correlates to a generational ignorance, meaning if I don't know something, well, the reason why don't even know, especially if it's a religious practice, if it's something that's so basic, it's the first commandment, that means it could not have been taught to me. And if it was not taught to me, why wasn't it taught to me? Could it be because my parents, the past generation, did not know either?
And to add on to that as well, it's not just a generational thing, but it would be from the rabbis themselves, because the guardians of the Torah were the rabbis. That's who it was passed down to, the teachers of the law. So if it just shows that the Torah has been lost from among the rabbis, the ones that were in charge of preserving it and teaching it and transmitting it. So this is a whole thing. Now, one thing I want to do before we actually get into the contents and the manuscript differences with regards to the Genesis 1 and 2 is just to explain to the audience. Now, they might be thinking we're a bit hypocritical here, because we keep talking about how, you can't prove that the Quran has borrowed, stories from this and that. Now, so why are we doing this with the Torah? Well, we are doing this with Genesis 1 and 2 because there is actual historical evidence. And in fairness to the Tanakh, it has history. It has genuine history that we can trace. So this is not to, as we mentioned, this is not to bash the Torah. It is actually to discover the truth and the falsehood within it, to discern what is to be followed, what is not to be followed, what aligns with the Quran, what doesn't align with the Quran, and to show the differences between the Jews and the Christians. It is a holistic analysis of what we are doing here. So, as we have mentioned in the last stream and this stream, we have proven there is a genuine link between the history of where the Jews have settled, who they mingled with, the fact that they actually had access to different traditions, which were highly likely to be incorporated into this text that they call the Torah, considering that there is concrete evidence. Even within the Jewish tradition, as we have mentioned, the Tikkun Sefarim, which is the restoration of the text, to say that the Torah has been lost, and they tried to reconstruct it. And they reconstructed it by, using different traditions, which we now call the priestly Yahwist, Elohist, and Deuteronomist traditions. This is the name given based on what we can see in the history. Why is that different from the Quran, and why is it actually... Now, can we say that the Quran actually also followed this idea of, Allah's throne being above the water being the same as the Mesopotamian stuff? Absolutely not. The reason being is because the Jews had direct connection with the Mesopotamian. They lived in the era that the Mesopotamians had this teaching, had the language still intact. Whereas when the Quran was revealed, there was no access to that information. As we know today, as Ali mentioned, we had to have access to the cuneiform tablets and have that translated before we could even understand what the Mesopotamians believed in. In the 7th century, there was no access to the Mesopotamians. That language was dead at that time. And there were no Jews to propagate that, because they weren't a people that would propagate their religion in the first place, let alone admit to propagating things that are not unique to God and borrowed from pagan traditions. So there is a direct connection, whereas with the Quran, it's not. And for those who say, well, the Quran actually copies the Genesis story, tell us which part of Genesis 1 and 2 is actually being copied. Are we talking about Genesis 2 when the rib, you know, where's the feedback coming from? It's weird. Anyway.
Ali,
Yeah,
can you,
Was
Ali,
that
can you
from
try
you?
muting yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, that's where the feedback was coming from. I think if you've got the YouTube on, turn it off. If you've still got the YouTube on, turn it off. Just keep the StreamYard on. Yeah, so are we talking about the rib? Why is that? I mean, there's a whole Genesis story. Why is that the only section that would be quote unquote copy? What about the aspect of Adam alayhi salam and Iblis? Why is that actually not found in the Genesis story? If anything, this is actually found in something called the cave of treasures, and it's actually in folio 5b, where it mentions about Satan being jealous of Adam and saying that I'm from fire and he's from clay and I'm not going to prostrate to him. And this is a 4th century document, again in a language that is not known to the Arabs. Okay, so you know, again, 300 years removed. Okay, and even then, when you look at the Cave of Treasures, you see that the Quran actually denies much of it. So when we are talking about plagiarism, why are there only certain things that the Quran mentions and not, you know, and largely ignores the canon of the Old Testament, the canon of the Tanakh? Why does it largely ignore that? And when we look at the comparison between what has been presented by Ali in terms of the Elish and the text of Genesis 2 in particular, we see a stark similarity, you know, and this is what he was trying to bring forward, right? And of course, if you've missed that, then this is my task more so, is just to bring that research together and present it to you in a way that you can understand, because it does get quite technical and not everyone's going to understand it. Okay, so if you do get the technical stuff, alhamdulillah. If you don't, alhamdulillah, we're here to make sure we understand it ourselves so that we can present it to you in a way that you can understand. So inshallah, we're going to get into the contents of this. We're going to pass it back to DeAndre and Faisal.
Wait, Yemeni, just
Okay.
just one. So I just want to
There's
close down
still
real quick.
that echo.
I
Yeah,
just
you
want
still
to
got
close.
the echo.
Oh, is it still? Whoa.
I think you may have to leave and come back, perhaps.
Okay.
Do you have a microphone on?
Yeah.
Are you using a headset?
Yeah, I'm using a headset.
Try leaving and coming back.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
No worries.
So in the meantime, while Ali's trying to resolve that, you know, I wanted to point this out. You know how Adriano, you pointed out you know, the rabbis preserving their scriptures or not being able to preserve the scripture. The Quran actually points this out, right? That, you know, the Christians and the Jews, their scriptures, the responsibility was given to their rabbis and monks, and they failed at it. And that's when he actually, you know, with the revelation of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took up that responsibility upon himself, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the priestly source that I mentioned comes in. We will you know, delve deeper into this in the upcoming streams. But you know, you can clearly tell when reading these that they focused more on the ritualistic practices rather than the law itself. And you know how we can tell, like Ali pointed out in the 2 Kings, where King Josiah, he figures out that, okay, we actually did not have access to the law.
Yeah.
What law is he referring to? He's referring to the 10 Commandments. This is actually mentioned the 10 Commandments. Can you imagine these people? They did not even preserve their basic commandments. All, look, 10 Commandments. That's it.
Yeah. And as we proved,
these should be memorized by people.
And
especially the first one.
Yeah, and as well as we proved in the previous episode, when we're looking at what the Torah is, we saw that there is actually a difference in the present day Torah in terms of what the 10 Commandments are, and even in the Quran, when Rasul is being asked about the 10 commandments, he gives them a completely different set of 10 commandments, which the Jews actually affirm. And of course, they try to hide the Sabbath from him. And then he highlights, oh, you forgot the Sabbath. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Yeah, by the way, there's something I want to make sure that people understand. There's a lot that we're saying, and there's a lot that we're not saying here as well. That we're not saying that this is actually copied from the Mesopotamian text. We're basically pointing out the similarities, and that shows that the whatever information they had initially, or whatever text they had, it started to get corrupted. And we're talking about a long time over which this is happening. We're not saying that it all changed in one generation, it all changed in 2 or 3 generations, or some sort of conspiracy was there to change the direction of what Jews were doing. That's not what we're positioning. What we're saying here really is that over time, right, what Jews were or what Jews have in their text, it starts to align more and more with the theology that was being practiced by the people surrounding them, the people who conquered them, the people who were able to impose their culture and traditions on the Jews. Now, again, this is it needs to be appreciated that despite all of that, the Jews were able to hold on to some sort of monotheism, and this is definitely a huge credit to the people who were able to do this. And again, as we know in the Quran, right, that this was a nation that was sent
Honestly,
prophets after prophet after prophet.
I wouldn't give them the credit to.
I mean,
for
I'm basically explaining.
They actually copied that from us.
Yeah,
You know,
we'll come to that, and I'll talk about that as well. So,
you know, and
the one last thing, Ali. So, as these prophets would come, and this is what the Islamic position is, that as these prophets would come over time, they would basically, it was like the reset button by God, right? That you've gone astray too much. Here's the reset, okay, and then they will come back to monotheism, and then we'll start seeing this sort of them going astray all over again.
Yeah. So, like this comment, he's saying, but Jews didn't hold on to monotheism. Earliest texts have polytheism, or I didn't get it. So, what we are actually displaying is that when we look at Genesis 1 and 2 and do comparison between the two, because at the end of the day, it's a doublet. It's the same story being told twice, just differently. But the first one actually holds on to Tawheed. The second one is where we have the influence of the Mesopotamian paganism brought in, and this Yahweh figure. Who Yahweh is, we have no idea. We don't know who it is. As the scholars deem him to be a pagan god, being introduced as the God of the Jews and the God of Israel, right? So this is who he is. So Tawheed is there, and it's preserved in the Torah. No one is saying it's not preserved, but the corruption of that is also present. And as Fawad mentioned, because of the Islamic influence, we were also a people that conquered the Jews and ruled over them. Due to our influence, we brought them back to Tawheed during our reign. And that's where you've seen the rabbinic, the medieval rabbinic age come to fruition and emphasize Tawheed. And that's when the polemics against the Christians was its strongest in terms of arguing for Tawheed. But throughout their history, they did change their beliefs or try to adopt their beliefs within monotheism and create, as we will see in years to come, the binitarian aspects and the Trinitarian aspects, which are not familiar, which no Christian will be familiar with. But we will see these sort of traditions which the Jews try to impose into their text and try and mix it with the monotheism that was taught by the prophets. So there's a lot going on there. There is real history. There is a level of preservation as well in terms of what we have in terms of the extant manuscripts. Faisal will get into this now, especially with regards to Genesis 1 and 2, but then we're going to be looking at the content as well. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Like Brother Faisal said, we are not saying that this is copied. We are saying, we didn't say that the Jews sat down, read the Elish and said, you know what, we're going to take this. We are saying that they have been influenced by the traditions and incorporated that into
within their faith.
text. Yeah, into their belief and text.
And so obviously that's why I mentioned earlier about the differences between the polytheistic perspective and the monotheistic perspective. So, but what I'm saying is the key things that they'll focus on, their style of writing, even as far as in Genesis 1, how God made the earth. He did this, and it was good. That resembles a similar structure as in the Elish as to how the earth was made, from Tiamut, the nose, the body, and everything. So the structure and the influences, the perspective itself is clearly, and on top of that, since they would have been without a doubt, even within the same scripture itself, it says that they were conquered by them. Well, in what way do you conquer a people? Not only to remove them from the land, but also to let them take on your influences. That's one of the best ways that comes along with being conquered. So ultimately, with the Elish, it's not like you said, Yamin. It's not that, oh well, let's copy, go style by style. Even to something that they're doing unintentionally. When you're copying something, when you're exposed to certain things, especially if it's been more than one generation, your children and their children are born in that kind of environment. So it only goes for certain that they take on whatever the environment is normalized. For example, if you're born from a country and you go to another country and you have kids there, you are going to another country with an accent. You come here with an accent, even though you have to learn a new language. You still have the accent of the country that you're from. Your children is born in and uses the accent of the country he's raised, not the country you're from, because that was his environment. And this goes hand in hand with it. So, and
I just want everyone to know that Ali is a proper racist. He's saying anyone with an accent isn't from the land that they're living in.
By the way, I want to make it. I want to explain these changes with an example, which Muslims, especially Muslim audiences, does, just so they can understand. Like we've seen today how under influence, a lot of Muslims have turned liberal. Like we have this idea of the liberal Muslims, the Orthodox Muslims, or the fundamental Muslim, or whatever else you want to call it, right? This is the kind of change that we're talking about, right? If you believe in evolution, this is evolution that we can sort of agree with without question, like the evolution of thoughts, the evolution of ideas, and this crept in over time. And we've seen this as they were a subjected people. This is what we're seeing a lot. And as we read through the text, it becomes more and more meaningful.
You use one example, now you're scarred for life. So. But, and again, and I mean, the simple fact that me living in the States for a long time, you don't really hear that thick African accent. Whereas if my father would come in, or if my mother, you hear more, because obviously they were raised in a particular area, and I was raised more in a particular area. So, and that's just the example that we're coming. Which I'm saying the Elish itself is a great example, because not only we have the reveal of what the Elish says, the fact that the stories, even though it's through a monotheistic and polytheistic sense, the stories, especially in Genesis 1 and 2, especially in Genesis 2, the story of human creation and the focus on the heavens and the earth, it matches alongside. And the fact that they felt, the people who were restructuring the Torah felt the need to make that its importance, talking about the heavens and the earth, talking about the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that within itself is an influence that is derived from their exposure to the religion of the Sumerians or the Babylonians through the Elish. So, and this is where we make the correlation, and we're using the whole history itself to do so, from the lack of knowledge through the actual events that took place within history and within the Bible itself. So this, and on top of that, just to finish out, the fact that there are no manuscripts that date back to the time of Moses. There are no manuscripts that go like some manuscripts that go of the Old Testament that go back as far through that time. that lack of knowledge, that lack of historical record that we don't have, coincides with the historical records that we do have. And even though the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, there's overwhelming evidence to show that there is inspiration coming across here. Now, we're not saying everything is corrupted. No, we're saying there is some influence. How many? God knows best, but there is without a doubt some influences when we look at the records and the evidence of the Elish, of the Babylonian, of the Assyrians influencing the people.
Yeah, and just just to try and wrap this part up so we can move on a little bit, inshallah, to the next part of the presentation. Just to make it clear, what we have that is extant is already the product of the changes done in the Assyrian and Babylonian period. And what we are doing, and fortunately, what the Tanakh actually documents is what happened during those times, quite accurately, actually. Right? We have to testify that this is actually done quite accurately. This is real history. This is the Tanakh is a testament to its own corruption, not in its entirety, because we are defending Genesis 1 as being closest to what would have originally been revealed to Musa alayhi salam, in terms of if that is what we are to believe. At the end of the day, us as Muslims, we are agnostic about that, because, as mentioned, we have a very certain idea of what the Torah is, and the Torah itself testifies to what it is. It's just law. So Genesis wouldn't be a part of that. But in terms of the original creation story, it's as close as we can get from a historical perspective. But we are agnostic about it. But let's have a look at the manuscript evidence, where the changes are, how many changes, and we can look at the content a bit more to expand on what Fuad presented earlier with regards to the comparisons between Genesis 1 and 2. And then we'll open up the floor to the guests.
All right.
If only we had the measuring stick, a criterion to filter out the wrong practice.
Well, honestly, it's something that we're just gonna have to live with, apparently, because where do we find that?
So let's start with this, because this is an interesting matter, right? Now, what do we have when it comes to the manuscripts of the Old Testament, right? There's a number of documents that critics go to, and that they're looking at when they're basically for lack of a better word, recreating what they think the original text would have looked like, right? One of them is definitely the Masoretic text, where we have the Leningrad Codex and the Aleppo Codex, right? Interestingly enough, these codices were completed during the and in the Islamic world, right? And under the influence of the Muslims, essentially. So the Jews were basically living in a time which, for most of the Jews, they considered the most peaceful time, in which they were able to do most of their work and were able to return to monotheism under the influence of the Islamic Khilafat, right? Then we have the Septuagint, the translation of the Hebrew text into Greek that was done around about 3rd century BC to the 1st century BC, was done, and according to legends, or according to myth, however you want to look at it, there were 72 translators, 6 from each of the 12 tribes, who were basically appointed to do the translation. And each of those were doing the translation separately, and lo and behold, each of them came up with the exact same translation of the text. Now, we would see here why some of it does not make sense, right? And there's definitely reasons to doubt that almost mythical, almost legend story that we have.
Yeah,
and we also have.
Sorry, just to be clear, because in terms of when we were talking about the disparity between the Jews and the Christian, the the Septuagint is that disparity as well. You have the tradition of Jews where they have this tradition that 72 scribes came together to create this translation, which the Jews themselves reject, which is interesting. But the Christians are the ones that accept it.
And interestingly enough, so number one, the New Testament, a lot of the times what the authors of the New Testament or the church fathers are referring to is actually the Septuagint. Plus, when we're looking at the text of the Septuagint, right, it contains additional books which are not there in the Masoretic text, and a lot of the views that the Christians hold on those books is that they're from the Apocrypha. They're not pseudo Deuteronomical. There's different ways of talking about those, but essentially what it boils down to is that there's this debate going on what essentially constitutes the Old Testament when we're looking at the Septuagint versus the Masoretic text.
Yeah.
Then we also have the Samaritan. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, because of you saying Yemenite, that's not why the Jews reject it. I didn't give a reason as to why the Jews reject it. I said, but the Jews reject the Samaritan Torah. I didn't say why. Sorry, the Greek Septuagint.
Yeah.
I didn't say why or when. So please pay attention to what is being said. But what is interesting, sorry, Faisal. What is interesting is though the Christians accept it, and like you mentioned, they've been using it. The New Testament, when quoting the Greek Septuagint, actually doesn't align with the Septuagint. And when we talk about the Septuagint, there isn't one text of the Septuagint. There are several texts of the Septuagint, and it doesn't actually align with any of them.
Yeah, and even for the Masoretic texts, I mean, there's multiple codices that are there. It wasn't just one translation. And interestingly enough, the Masoretic text is a translation into Hebrew from Greek and other languages that the Jews undertook in the Middle Ages, essentially around 5th century to the 10th and 11th century, right? So that's when the Masoretic text is being translated back into Hebrew from other languages, right? We do have the what do we call it? The Peshitta Aramaic Bible and the Samaritan Bible as well, right? Which is in Syriac, and these are also considered some somewhat important historical texts that these authors are going back to. And finally, there's the Latin Vulgate, which became the standard text for the church for a long period of time, and that's why it's considered as important. Although most of it is a translation from the Greek Septuagint, right? So that's just so we can understand what we're talking about now. Finally, the most important piece here is the Dead Sea Scrolls. So these were discovered more recently, and essentially what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, they're not a complete set of the Bible. They're not a complete Tanakh or Old Testament, or however you want to term it. These are scrolls that people have found near the Dead Sea in different caves. And it's not just one scroll, it's multiple scrolls. Each scroll has different contents, and there may be repetition between different scrolls. And multiple scrolls have been found. These scrolls are in the Old Hebrew. There's the consonantal Hebrew without the vowels added to it. So it's not essentially a one-on-one text to the Masoretic text as you would expect. But the interesting part about this whole thing is that what the Dead Sea Scrolls allowed for the Christians and Jews to do is date back the Old Testament at least to the 3rd century BC. so these scrolls date anywhere from the 3rd century to around about 70 BC, right? 3rd century BC to 70 BC, and different scrolls have different parts of the text in there. Now, I'm actually going to bring up what we have when it comes to the Genesis 1 and 2. Let's take a look at what we have in these texts, and we'll take a look at how different they are from the current Masoretic text, which is sort of considered the standard when it comes to the Old Testament. Let me see. Let's share screen. Okay. So I'm actually gonna go over this fairly quickly. There are around 20 to 22 texts which contain scrolls which contain the Genesis story, right? When we're looking at them verse by verse, we would actually find that there are certain verses which we've confirmed through the Dead Sea Scroll, but definitely there are certain verses which you cannot find in the Dead Sea Scrolls that we've found so far, right? For example, verses 29, 30, 31 on in Genesis 1. Genesis 2, we have even less. 4 and 5 is missing. 8 to 13 is missing. Then we've got 20 to 25 missing. Each of these scrolls have different contents in there, right? And we can see that there's when it comes to Genesis 1 and 2, there's only a few scrolls that have that in there. Now, how different is the text when you compare it to the Masoretic text? And this is one thing where you have to give them credit that there's little variance which is meaningful or which is theologically significant. Most of it may be of small, very small, very little significance. Maybe one word has been written without in a different way, or an explanation is given. For example, one place that we do find this. Let me see if I have that highlighted. Here it is. So in the scroll 4Q10 Genesis, right, verse 9 in Genesis 1, it just has some additional wordings, but that doesn't necessarily impact what the verse is saying. For example, generally the verses would say, let the waters under the sky be gathered together to one place, collection, and dry land appear, and it was so. I'm reading the translation just because I want to make sure that it sort of makes sense to the people. Like in this particular scroll, it just, when it ends at and it was so, while other scrolls were ending there, here, and the waters and then the sky were gathered together to their place, and the dry land appeared, right? So yes, it's an addition to the text, but it's of no significance over here. Now, what do scholars and what do the textual critics do when it comes to this? So they basically, once they've confirmed this, they're basically assuming that, yeah, 4 and 5 most likely will be the same as what we have in the Septuagint or what we can find in the Masoretic text. And they basically accept these type of variances. Now, bear in mind, I'm not saying that you guys don't have anything, so you don't, that method is wrong, but essentially just to give you guys an idea about what you would normally find in these type of documents, right? Or what you would find when you're looking at this.
But the reality is that we don't actually know what the original text was.
Yeah.
All scholars have to back project and assume what the text was where there is none.
Exactly. Now, just to give you guys an idea about what type of variances there are between the texts now, some of the more critical variances that come up are between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text, specifically because of the way the two languages are so different. Because when it comes to the Syriac or the Aramaic, these are all Semitic languages, and they sort of shares some similar roots. So you don't have that much variance in those texts as you do between the Greek and here. So one of the most significant variants in the Greek text to the between the and the Hebrew text, right, the Masoretic and the Septuagint, is on the word Yehovah, right, or Yahweh, or however you want to pronounce the tetragrammaton. Okay, so because there's no equivalent of that text in Greek, depending on whose translation you pick up, whether it's the original Septuagint or one of the church fathers who may have used it, or someone else who, for example, if it's Theodosian or Symmachus or Aquila, the words or the words they use to describe Yahweh may be different. It could be either theos, or they could use a different word, right? And these type of differences, although they may not be as significant, but they still were meaningful enough that the scholars try to understand why that happened, why they chose a particular type of word. But those are the kind of challenges that you face when you come across translations.
Yeah. So, it's very clear that, what we see, I mean, aside from the fact that, again, when we talk about preservation, passing down the Torah, and all of that stuff, we can see that there is much, even in Genesis 1 and 2. Genesis 2 more than Genesis 1, but there's much of the text missing. And there are variants, not many, as we say, in credit, where credit's due, from, where we have it in the second century BC up until today. It's Genesis 1 and 2 is fairly intact in terms of what we have extant from the Dead Sea Scrolls. But much of what people read today isn't actually present in the earliest manuscripts. But let's look at the content. Let's look at the actual.
Yeah. Before we go in the content, I just want to emphasize one critical matter here, right? And that is that what we're going back to is the 3rd century BC at best, right? We're not positioning here that because we can go back to the 3rd century BC and we see very little variance of the text since the 3rd century BC to now, that means the text is throughout its life has been preserved, right? We don't know what the original text was, and before the 3rd century BC, what happened to the text. We've got the text itself talking about how certain parts of the text were lost, and that's that I want to re-emphasize this point, because what Fawad and the brothers have already discussed about them discovering these scrolls and the whole theatrics of what happened, and the king sort of ripping his clothes off, it shows that before 3rd century BC, there were problems with the text. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And that does not go away.
Yeah, exactly. By the time we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, the corruption has already taken place.
Yes.
All that we can do right now is examine what remains and figure out what's going on with it. But yeah, so that's the main point here. But DeAndre, inshallah, we'll bring it back to you and bring it full circle for you to present the contents of the of Genesis 1 and 2 and what we can discern from them.
Got you. So this is what I'm going to cover. I'm going to go through the Spirit of God. I'm going to give you pre-creation breakdown, what was created on what day, and the problems with that. I'm going to go over the verse in Genesis that says, "Let us create man in our image," through some contradictions, and then God resting on the seventh day. Let's do it, inshallah. So the first two verses of Genesis read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now, verse 2 says, which is what we're going to be focusing on here, it says, "Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." Okay, so now let's first highlight the Christian and the Jewish understandings before we get into which has more biblical basis. So Ellicott's commentary for English readers says, quote, "The Spirit of God," Hebrew, "a wind of God," i.e. a mighty wind, as rendered by the Targum and most Jewish interpreters. They said, when then creation is ascribed to the wind, Job chapter 26, verse 13, Psalm 104, verse 30, we justly see not the mere instrumental force employed, but rather that divine operative energy which resides especially in the third person of the Holy Trinity. But we must be upon our guard against the common error of commentators who read into the text of these most ancient documents perfect doctrines which were not revealed in their fullness until the gospel was given. It is a marvelous fact that Genesis does contain a germ of well nigh every evangelical truth, but it contains it in a suggestive and not a completed form. So here this mighty energizing wind suggests to us the thought of the Holy Ghost, and is far more eloquent in its original simplicity than when we read into it a doctrine not made until the revelation was perfected in Christ. So the commentary is very clear. It states that the Spirit of God in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 is kind of a way for us, or for Christians, to think about the Holy Spirit, meaning that the Spirit of God is a representative of the Holy Spirit, or it is the Holy Spirit. The commentary also says something interesting. It says that these doctrines were not necessarily fully revealed, which is a position that no Christian takes. But let's look at the Jewish position. What is the Jewish understanding? So this is going to be from Radak commentary by Rabbi David Kimhi, and it's going to be from the Talmud. So Radak says the word ruach here is in a construct mode to indicate that it functions as an agent of its creator, of God. Its assignment had been to provide the necessary motion over the waters and to help dry them out, in a manner of speaking, as explained by Ibn Ezra. It is also possible that the reason it appears in this mode is because it is such a powerful agent of God that it sometimes appears to have divine force. It is quite common in our use of language that when we want to stress the power of someone or something, we somehow associate it with the name of God. In the book of Jonah, the city of Nineveh is thus described as Il Dulal Elohim, i.e. a large, exceedingly large city. Jonah chapter 3, verse 3. And Psalms 36, verse 7 uses Pari Alefle, the expression in order to describe towering mountains. Right? So it's clear the Jews have a different understanding at this point. Christians believe that the Spirit represents the third person of the Trinity, whereas Jews believe it's an agent of God. The Talmud also states in Chedika 5:12a, verses 5 and 6, that the Spirit of God was created. So verse 5 says, the Gemara continues to discuss creation. Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, 10 things were created on the first day of creation, and they are as follows: heaven and earth, tohu and vohu, i.e. unformed and void, light and darkness, wind and water, the length of day and the length of night. So now these 10 things are created on the first day, right? Verse 6 says, all of these are derived from the Torah, and he's citing Genesis 1:1, heaven and earth, tohu and vohu, Genesis 1:2, the light was unformed and void, darkness, Genesis 1:2, light, Genesis 1:3. Now, wind and water, as it is written, and the wind of God hovered over the face of the waters, Genesis 1:2. Wait, do you want to say something or what?
No, sorry, I was burping.
No problem. I got you. So from this passage, we can tell that the wind of God, according to them, the wind was created on the first day. And we know that because the wind of God, Ruach, was hovering over the face of the waters. So it's clearly exegetical. Like, it states that the Spirit of God is created. Now, which one has more biblical basis? The Jews have a different understanding than the Christians. The Jewish commentator is right in saying that certain expressions within Hebrew can be used to kind of stress the vastness or the exceeding greatness or power of such thing. To say that the Spirit of God is the third person of the Trinity would be antithetical to Christians, because in the New Testament, which they believe in, it makes reference to 7 spirits of God. So even if the Christians say that those 7 spirits are not part of the Trinity, it could at least be logically deduced by someone who wants to say that they, follow a Trinity or something like that. So based on that, the Jewish understanding has more biblical basis. All right, let's discuss scientific errors in the creation narrative. So let's go to the creation breakdown. I'm going to give you what was created on what day, and the verses if you want to challenge. So the light was created on the first day, verses 3 to 5. The sky was created on the second day, verses 6 to 8. Vegetation was created, the land was created, verses 9 to 11, and vegetation, verses 11 to 13. Sun and the moon were created in the fourth day, verses 14 to 19. Sea creatures and winged creatures were created on the fifth day, verses 20 to 23. Man was created on the sixth day, 24 to 27. And God resting on the seventh day, Genesis 2, verse 1 to 3. So what are some problems that we see? Well, first of all, the light was created on the first day, but the sun, the moon, and the stars were created on the fourth day. What was the light that was created? Right? Next, we see that the vegetation was created on the third day, but the sun was created on the fourth day. How is vegetation created on the third day and sun created on the fourth day when vegetation requires the sun? Right? So, what about the sun and the earth? In a book article entitled "How Old is the Sun?" from Stanford University Press, the author writes. The author says, dating the sun is an indirect process. There are several independent ways of estimating the age, and they all give nearly the same answer, about 5 billion years. So an article entitled "Geologic Time, Age of the Earth" from USGS publication Warehouse, it says, the ages measured for Earth's oldest rocks and oldest crystals show that the Earth is at least 4.3 billion years old in age. So the sun came into existence before the Earth, but wasn't the Earth created before the sun? So there's many scientific issues. Also, the sun is required for the solar system, but the sun was created on the fourth day, when the land and the seas and everything was created on the third day. That doesn't make any sense. So what are some other problems here? So we have chapter 1, verse 26, where it says, let's create man in our image. Right? Now, this is in contradiction with chapter 2, verses 7 to 8, because in 26 and 27, it says that he created them male and female. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 to 8 says that Adam was created then. Also, Christians often quote this verse to prove the Trinity, saying that us here means that God is speaking to multiple people regarding creation. But even if we were to grant that that's actually what it means, that doesn't necessarily mean that it validates the Christian concept. Why can't it validate polytheism or the Jewish understanding, which I'm going to quote Rashi in a minute? Or why can't it violate 4 in 1 or 5 in 1 or 6 in 1? It's generally ambiguous. Anyway, Jewish commentator Rashi says, we will make man, although they did not assist him in forming him, the man, and although this use of the plural may give the heretics an occasion to rebel, i.e., to argue in favor of their own views, yet the verse does not refrain from teaching proper conduct and the virtue of humbleness, namely, that the greater should consult and take permission from the smaller. For had it been written, I shall make man, we could not then have learned that he spoke to his judicial council, but himself. And as a refutation of the heretics, it is written immediately after this verse, and he created, and it is not written, and they created. Okay, so final problems with the creation narrative, and then we can open the floor for challenges, inshallah. So another problem that we see is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 5. It reads, it says, "Now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground." So this contradicts with Genesis 1:11-13, because he created the vegetation on that day. And in Genesis 2, it says that there's no shrub on the ground. So that's contradictory. And finally, the final problem is God resting on the seventh day. So this is a theological problem, and it contradicts the scripture. So the issue becomes, what does it mean in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1-3, where it says that God finished the work he'd done, and he rested on the seventh day? Well, when we tie it into Exodus 31:17, it's quite theologically problematic. So it says, "It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed." So normally when we point out Genesis 2, people will say that the word for rested means cease from work. And that's fine, and they have biblical basis for that. What they don't have biblical basis for, though, is this word here, refreshed. The Hebrew word is nafesh, and according to New American Standard Old Testament Hebrew Lexicon, it says to take breath, refresh oneself, to breathe passively, to be breathed upon, figuratively, refreshed as if by a current of air. So another way that we can know that this can't be metaphorical is if how we look at how the word nefesh is used in the Old Testament. It's a generally good idea to examine how certain words are used in the Old Testament. Nefesh is used in two other places. In Exodus 23:12, which is talking about the exact same thing, it says, 6 days do your work, but on the seventh day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. Right? And then 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 14 says, "The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination, exhausted, and there he refreshed himself." So this is proof that the biblical God became tired and he needed to take a breath. Now, lastly, this contradicts with another verse in Isaiah 40:28. It says, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord, he does not grow weary, he does not grow faint, and his understanding is beyond one can fathom." So all in all, the content of Genesis 1 is not theologically supporting to the Christians. It is inconsistent within the creation narrative, as it contradicts scientific discovery. It is contradicting between the first two chapters, and it poses several theological problems for Christians and Jews, especially with God resting. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brother Yemeni so he can open the floor, inshallah.
I think I just want to add a couple of things here, and this is important to point out just as an emphasis, right? In Genesis 1 and all the way up to Genesis 2 verse 3, right? We see whenever God is mentioned, the term used is Elohim. It's not Yahweh, Jehovah, and then as soon as we start in verse 4 and onwards, right, we see the word Yehovah getting being used there, right? So the second narrative contains the word Yehovah, and this is just emphasizing that point again, right?
And pertaining to the whole resting part, right? I mean, why we emphasize, and it's very interesting how the Quran actually goes out of its way to actually correct this narrative, right? And if Ali, I think, mentioned that earlier, or I don't know if he got to that part, Numa Alesh, right? the gods, they rest and celebrate after Marduk, he completes creation, right? So this idea is actually taken from there. So that's what we were referring to earlier, that we are not claiming that your entire book has been copied from these pagan religions, but a lot of these paganistic elements, they seep through over centuries, and it's very clear. You can it attributes to God Almighty certain things that totally go against the nature of God itself, first of all, and then within your own book, like Brother DeAndre pointed out, right? In other places, it says God does not become weary,
Yeah, and the thing is, when we were talking about the Quran copying and stuff, actually the Quran makes a direct response to this, but in Surah Qaf, chapter 50, verse 38, where Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا فِي سِتَّةِ أَيَّامٍ وَمَا مَسَّنَا مِنْ لُغُوبٍ. So Allah, there wasn't any fatigue whatsoever. So it's a direct response to that correlation between God resting and sanctifying the Sabbath, and the fact that He refreshed, as mentioned in Exodus 31. So the Quran is actually engaging with the Bible and actually rejecting what Genesis is attributing to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So it's interesting things like that. But what's also interesting, and I think credit to Brother Faisal for finding this, is in Genesis 1:26 as well. It when it's mentioned in our image, Besal Menu, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. A meaning of that is also to mean a representative figure. So in the same way as mentioned in the Quran, that
Khalifa.
Yeah, Khalifa. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala mentions about Khalifa in chapter 2, verse 30, if I'm not mistaken.
Chapter 2, verse
31, I think. Is it 31? وإذ قال ربك للملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك دماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون. So it's very, very specific in the Quran, which is very similar to what the connotation of the word in that's used in Genesis 1:26, in our image. So we can see how the Quran is actually interacting with the Old Testament, and how the Old Testament and how Genesis 1 is closer to what we believe could be the monotheistic aspects of the Torah, whereas Genesis 2 is clearly far from it and having a lot of the paganistic traditions within it.
Even when we see the whole aspect of Genesis 1 verse 26, because let's not forget, it's talking about mankind. So in Genesis 1, it talks about both man and woman at the same time, the creation of man and woman. Whereas Genesis 2, then you get the idea of one coming before the other. So it's Genesis, and this is why when we talk to Christians, we would say, read the next verse, because it says they would read man, but it's man referring to all of mankind, or referring to mankind itself. And like as you brothers were talking about, the whole idea of image. But the very next verse, it talks about how it's using what is regarding. It says male and female. He made them male and female. So that means, if you want to have this perspective of, well, it's talking about how, it's a likeliness, physical likeness, then congratulations, you just made God both a male and a female, like some kind of variation between the two. So imagine if somebody said, then you will ask the question, well, if you believe Jesus is God, why can't God come down as a woman, since woman was also made in His image? So a whole bunch of can of worms open up when you are trying to make the text read something that when you actually read it, it doesn't say. And you juxtapose that between the second verse, and this goes back to the believe it or not, this goes back to the Elish, where it talks about the whole story of creation. When it says, even when it says that God rested in the Elish, not only did they rest after the great battle was won and all the humans were created as a result of the great battle between the gods or whatever. Even before then, because Apsu and Tiamat did not mean to create did not even mean to create the other gods. After it took place, Tiamat needed to rest. So here you have this opening, this concept of resting after creation, and that's what we're alluding to. Not saying that again it's a copy, but it's the fact that it's focusing on this particular topic of having to rest after creating something, that whole topic as a whole, and it's using this general topic of resting after creation. Even when you say, well, the gods did not need to rest, or he's God, he doesn't need to rest, the fact that it feels the need to bring that up or to use that as a literary device or a plot device is where the inspiration would come from. And because we can see the whole idea of resting as a whole is contrary to the nature of the one true God, unless you're a polytheist.
Okay, inshallah. Well, we've put the link out there. I've pinned it on for people to see. I think Faisal, have you pinned it on your side? Can't hear you. Well, we got Sheldon.
Fawad, can you do that?
Sure. Inshallah, I'll do that.
We got Sheldon, so we'll bring Sheldon on. Sheldon.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey,
How you
you guys?
Good.
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Not bad. I don't know what he's laughing about, by the way. I ain't got a clue. I'm not in on that joke.
By the way, before we go on, Sheldon, was this what we discussed today and what we presented today, was that useful? Even as a Christian, were there some things that you weren't aware of?
Yes, it was useful.
Okay.
Good insight. There were a couple of things that I wouldn't say that I wasn't aware of, but things that in the past I haven't given much attention to. But yeah, you guys covered a lot of points.
Well, look, take your pick. I mean, at the end of the day, this is calling into question, of course, several things. But you get to pick what you want to discuss about and see if
For sure. So first I'll just touch one of the last points you guys made about I think Exodus 31, when it says that God rested. So
Yeah.
a good way to answer this is to just read Rashi's commentary, which he says that when God uses that term, he's doing it to appeal to human ears. So here, I'll pull it up and I'll read it exactly what he says. Let me see. Hang on. So he says, "He about whom it is written, he neither tires nor wearies." That's Isaiah 40, and whose every act is performed by speech alone, without physical effort, dictated rest in reference to himself only in order to make it understood to the human ear with words that it can understand. So it's not saying that he, at least by Rashi's view and the view that I would take, it's not saying that he literally refreshed or rested or took a breath or such, but that he uses that term to appeal to human ears.
See, I mean, I'll let DeAndre come in on this a bit more. I can tell he's already gearing up for that. But when in terms of using language that appeals to people's ears, Rashi also acknowledges that God uses language in which he doesn't tire. This is also language that appeals to us, that we understand, that we can appreciate that God doesn't need to rest. So, it's a polemic that Rashi is trying to use, which doesn't really help him because it doesn't make sense. But I'll let DeAndre expand on that.
It doesn't make sense. There's no there's no criteria you use to determine what language you classify under that.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
What do you say to what do you say to that? Because you know,
Like, do you just classify that because it doesn't really like support your your viewpoint, or like what language do you actually point to that?
I would like to know if he actually agrees with Rashi's concept of Messiah, but that's another topic altogether.
Oh yeah, let's
You
see
know what?
what.
But
Obviously
before we even get there, Sheldon, and I just want to piggyback off what Yamini said about the whole issue with um going along with the people's concept. That's you open the door to anachronisms, and which an anachronism, like Fawad mentioned earlier, is a flaw. That's kind of like when you try to compare stuff around the past. And one of the biggest examples of anachronisms is when you use a political title that did not exist, or name a country that did not exist during that particular time. Like if I was to if I was living during the time of Jonah, and I called the country that I was in Iraq, that would that would not make sense. The same way as even when I'm referring to the people of Jonah, I have to call it Nineveh. If I called it Iraq, obviously at that time it wouldn't be, but that's going along with my anachronisms. That itself is a flaw. So if you use that same that concept of saying, well, God is using the people's understanding, well, in that kind of way, you open the door to a lot of issues as to conflating about the who-ness of God. The who-ness of God cannot correspond to people. I mean, cannot be subject to just the people's understanding, because you would agree that we can't necessarily understand God fully. So that idea itself is very, very problematic, because it leads to a lot of like opening up a huge can of worms.
Can of
Okay,
God?
And what's the
hold on.
point
But
of?
first,
Oh,
I wanna address,
Well,
because the
yeah,
analogy
let's
the analogy that Ali used is a little flawed, because I believe, and if I'm wrong, you're obviously referencing the fact that, let's say, I'll give an example that a lot of Muslims have used, that I've spoken to, the fact that the Bible says during the time of Joseph the term Pharaoh was used, when the Quran supposedly corrects it by saying during the time of Joseph the term king was used. Uh, is that an example you would be referring to?
I don't want to switch. I want to, because I really just wanted to keep the convo
he
between me
didn't
and
refer to an
guys.
example. He just said that your line of logic leads to that.
No,
That's the
I
logical
understand that,
endpoint.
but the analogy that he used by saying that if he were living in the time of the people of Nineveh,
Sheldon,
you couldn't call it.
I just use an example. That's it. I mean, so if you want to get to that, we can. That's some topic for another stream. But I just use it as an example. That's it. So I don't want to derail or go off topic in a way. But the example, don't necessarily attack the example. Just attack the concept of the point of the whole issue that Brother Yemeni and Brother DeAndre are telling you. That's about it. I just use an example. That's enough.
Because see, like also the same exact terminology is used elsewhere in Tanakh as well, where it actually goes on to say that he was refreshed, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
you
that's what I
have
said.
one
Yeah.
place that actually, one place that it says that that he rested. And what do we normally associate rest with or refreshment with after you're done doing something really exhaustive? So creation taking place, right? Creation of everything, and then rest being associated to that deity, right? Like Sheldon, look, what like at the end of the day, yes, you will find commentaries, you will find rabbis, Christians trying to reconcile this issue. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, look, you have on one hand, you have one book that actually says God performed all of these tasks, then he rested and he needed refreshment. And then on the other hand, you have another book that says that he created everything, but no weariness took over him. What do you think makes more logic and more sense if you were to compare these two books, or these two narratives pertaining to this issue?
Are you just counting the book, the verse, or are you including the entire? Like, are you including
No,
the
no,
entire Bible?
I'm only referring to this verse.
Uh, okay, so in comparison, which one would be more logical, referring to God?
To
Is that what
God.
you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I have to side with the verse of the Quran,
Thank you.
because if you take the verse from Exodus, just take it out and you don't add anything else, don't read anything else, and yes,
No,
you come to
even
that conclusion.
but the thing is, I mean, you appeal to Rashi with his understanding. Now, the thing is, what Rashi does, and what the mistake that Rashi actually does, is that he tries to go back to the root word, right? And he tries to go to the root and derive from the noun soul, right?
Yes, yes.
Now, what he explains is the idea is that one calms his soul and takes a breath when one reposes after the toil of labor. So even though he goes back to the root word of the soul, he still explains it as being refreshed, taking a breath and resting and refreshing after labor, right? But then he contradicts himself by quoting Isaiah 40:28, which affirms the ayah in the Quran, right? So, because remember, Rashi's, why I'm saying he affirms the Quran is because Rashi's writing in the 12th century, right? He's not writing beforehand, but he's quoting Isaiah, which and it's which affirms that, as it mentions, do you not know? Have you not heard? The Eternal is God from of old, creator of heaven. Creator of earth from end to end, who never grows faint or weary, whose wisdom cannot be fathomed. So again, in this idea, when he says himself in order to make comprehensible to the human ear what he can understand, I'm sure that the human ear can understand who never grows faint or weary, whose wisdom cannot be fathomed. This is something that is comprehensible. So he's constantly contradicting himself, and this is not an exegesis that makes sense. And as you mentioned, you have to align with what the Quran says, because that is befitting of who God is. So when we see the Yahweh's tradition in Genesis 2 attributing resting to God, right, being cross-referenced with Exodus 31:17, I said 7 earlier, that's my mistake. It just shows that it's what we see in Genesis 2, which is the doublet of the creation story, is now attributing things to God that doesn't befit him. And the Quran comes in and actually, deals with that and ensures that the right of God is given to him, that he doesn't, that there is no fatigue that ever even touches him.
Yeah, I just I was actually eating something back, but I can actually ask Sheldon a question. The problem here is that when you say that God is using this particular language in order for us to understand, what is there to be understood? What is there to be understood from this particular use of language?
Good question.
What is our, and if he's using that, what is our understanding of rest? You brothers mentioned earlier, if he's using our rest in our understanding, like Fawad, I think it was Fawad that said that the way how we understand rest is a meaning of necessity. That's the concept of how we understand rest. So that can't be the case. Otherwise, you're really proving our point. If he's using our understanding and you say rested, any other time we use the word rest to one another, we mean it in, we take it as a way, oh, you actually need to rest, meaning something happened and you're tired. So if he's using our
it's an indication of weakness.
Exactly. That's how we understand it here. That's how we understand it.
And then especially, look, we have to not ignore the context. He did something substantial, created everything that we can see around us and things that we cannot even see, right? And after that task, it actually says that he rested.
Exactly.
So it's quite explicit.
Let Sheldon come in.
Yes, you guys make pretty good points. And in all honesty, I can't really refute any of these points. It's just one of the things that I've never really given too much attention to. But just thought that maybe.
Look, we appreciate the honesty. We love the honesty, but we love the honesty that you have with regards to what we present and what you have and everything. But on top of that, we ask sincerity from each other. Everyone, we all know how many channels you go on and everything, but we ask sincerity from you, okay? For your sake, not for ours. What you choose to do, it's not going to affect us one way or the other. It's going to affect you, right? But if you see that, you know, there are certain things that you currently believe in that you cannot substantiate, and that do not benefit God, then follow that which does benefit, not benefit God, but befit God. Then follow that which does befit God. You know, at the end of the day, we started this stream talking about Tawheed, about Echad, you know, how Allah, God, Allah is introduced in Genesis 1 as Elohim, that's his name. Whereas in Genesis 2:7, you see Yahweh Elohim. Elohim is then relegated to a title, and this phantom name comes in out of the blue. You know, it is out of the blue, and we can prove it through the traditions. So this is no longer things that we are just saying. We've been saying this for a while, alluding it for a while, but now we are bringing it to you and providing the evidence of these traditions. You know, who is Yahweh? You know, because at the moment, when you believe in Yahweh, who is he?
One other thing, Sheldon. I know you probably cannot answer this immediately, but we talked a lot about how you're tracing back the Old Testament text, right?
That's one thing I wanted to bring up.
So this is, we've had a lot of discussions about it. You personally believe that this is a reliable text, and that you can actually go back to the originals. So do you have anything to say on that part?
Oh yeah. So one thing I wanted to bring up is I believe earlier in the stream somebody brought up, a lot of you guys used the argument that you can't.
Sheldon, it is a bit hard to hear you. I'm not sure if it's just me or the brothers. So
yeah, come close to the microphone a little bit.
Let me see if I can
hear me better.
I can hear him fine. Let me put his mic up.
okay.
Yeah, go on. Speak.
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh yeah,
much better.
Okay. So I'm curious as to why you guys use the argument that we can't trace the Old Testament back to Moses, because I feel like that's a little bit of a weak argument, because I don't think you can really trace many historical texts to the time of Moses. So why would you use that argument if you?
Do you degrade the Old Testament to just historical text?
Let me actually point this out.
Let Faisal take this one.
Yeah. So Sheldon, what we're saying is, at best, what you can do, based on the historical evidence that is available, you can trace it all the way back to the 3rd century BC. Right? Do you think Moses was alive in the 3rd century BC, or Musa alayhi salam?
No, he was alive way.
How far back was that?
How far back is what?
When was Moses around? Like just roughly, which century BC?
I think the 11th, right? Somewhere around there.
People say the historians basically say could be anywhere between the 15th century BC to the 11th or 12th century BC, right? Different calculations basically put him around that period, right? Let's say it's the 11th century, okay? At best, closest to the 3rd century. How many years is that?
Around 700, right?
800 years.
700 to 800 years, right?
Yeah.
So my question to you is, can you establish how you go back from the 3rd century to the 11th century? Because remember, the burden of proof here for you to claim that this goes all the way back to Moses is to establish that I can trace it back all the way there. Otherwise, I mean, what we're saying is it's a no-brainer. If you can establish all the way back to Moses or that time period, then we probably have something to discuss.
Well, yeah, you can't really establish. Again, that's what I was trying to say. You can't really establish it back to the time of Moses. You can't really establish anything.
That's exactly what we're saying.
And this is what we're saying. Is saying you believe that the Torah that you have today is that from God given to Moses. but you have no way of establishing that. Well, now what we have done in the previous episode, I don't know if you've watched it, but in the previous episode and in this episode is establish a history that we can trace based on the history that we find in what is recorded in the extant manuscripts of the Old Testament and the known history of the Near Eastern traditions. And we see is that the Old Testament is actually being verified by extra biblical history, specifically with regards to the Assyrian and Babylonian eras, who dominated the Jews in the land of Israel, right? And we see much of their traditions being incorporated into the text of the Tanakh, which is, and this is why when we no, but let me just finish. And which is why when we see what we have received in the 3rd century BC onwards is the finished article of what has occurred beforehand, right? Not necessarily the finished article, but like the corruption has already taken place because we see the traditions and the influence incorporated into the text. But what the original text beforehand, again, we have, as we mentioned in Exodus, right? As mentioned in the Quran and the Hadith, with regards to what the Torah was at the time of Moses, which being just the commandments, right? Just the 10 commandments, and the oral law was taught orally, right? The 613 laws that was taught orally, and because that was always given in the tablets, right? And then in the 7th century, we see the testimony of the Jews in the Hadith tradition of a different text altogether, right? Which affirmed the coming of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as the laws that we find in, Leviticus, mostly, right? So there are things there. There's a spectrum there that we look at. So the question we asked before in the previous stream is, what is the Torah to you, right? And in this stream is we're actually proving that from the get-go, we don't actually know what it is. We don't know what you've got. It's been influenced by other traditions. So and I really want you to answer the question of who is Yahweh, because at the end of the day, the most important thing is regarding who God is, because he's introduced to us as Elohim in Genesis 1. But then in Genesis 2:7, where we find the Yahweh's tradition, suddenly we're introduced to a Yahweh figure, and Elohim is relegated to nothing but a title. Yeah. So sorry.
Yeah,
but if you
I
can
could
answer
answer that.
Yeah.
Not in any good detail, but I would say that it has to do with my first answer would be the copying of text of the text. So and this would be the sort of answer I give when somebody says why does the Bible say that the term, or why does it attribute the term Pharaoh during the time of Joseph? Well, you got to understand that during the time that the Torah was being written, like when it was written, the term Pharaoh was the term that was known to the people, which is the reason why they would use it. So in the same way, if a scribe or if a rabbi or such was copying down or making a copy of the Torah, then he would use and he saw the term a term that's outdated, like a term like Elohim, when in Exodus God said to Moses, "You shall use the name Yahweh for me," from the point that he revealed it to, forever, essentially. Then they would replace the term Elohim with the term Yahweh.
Okay,
Sheldon,
so
hold on.
I think there's a few fundamental issues, because you mentioned about the scribes changing it and essentially being anachronistic with the text. Now, if they were being anachronistic with the text, you would expect them to change Genesis 1 as well to Yahweh.
Yeah.
Right. If they are going to use outdated, if they're going to replace the outdated terms or the outdated names, that's the first thing. The second thing is with regards to Musa alayhi salam. When God identifies himself to Musa, he doesn't use the name Yahweh. if actually there is not a single time, I know we're talking about Genesis 1 and 2 in particular, but just to extend that a little bit, not a single prophet in the entirety of the Tanakh ever received the name Yahweh from God himself. They've never, like, you know how God introduces himself to Abraham by his name, and he introduces himself to Moses by his name. He doesn't. Both times, it's never Yahweh. It's El Shaddai and Ahya, or El Gabor, and Ahya, Ahya. Never Yahweh. So again, who is Yahweh? I appreciate you can't give any detail, but these are questions that we give you to think about, to ponder, to reflect, to go away and research and evidence, because we've been saying this for a while. I mean, especially this year when we've been sort of teasing what we're going to do, what we are doing now. Yeah. But we started to tease this, about who Yahweh is, to get people to start. Yeah.
I just want to add something. It's a bit of a tangent, but this is especially for Sheldon. Sheldon, you were saying that the scribes, when they're copying it, because Pharaoh was the more common term to be used, that's why they copied the term.
King was a lot more common.
Wait. Sheldon, go ahead. What were you saying?
Well, I would say that to the Jewish people after the time of the Exodus, when they would copy down the Torah, the term Pharaoh was not the more common term. I would assume it was the only term that they knew for the ruler of Egypt, or that they would be familiar with.
So Sheldon,
the problem with that.
So Sheldon, here's the question to you, right? Why and how is it different in the Quran? Have you ever thought about that? Throughout history, I mean, the people who've written history, the Jews, they wrote down Pharaoh. Why did the Prophet, peace be upon him, brought forth a book that didn't say Pharaoh, but said king? Have you ever thought about that? I just want to leave you with this.
I want to ask you just one thing.
Fuad, before you go, Fuad, so I do apologize, Akhi, before you go, because I want to get this understanding before we go on, because there seems to be this idea that a pharaoh is the same as a king.
Oh no.
So, Sheldon, what's a pharaoh?
Are you asking me by the Jewish term, or are you asking me by the
Egyptian term? I just mean what does the word pharaoh mean? What is a pharaoh?
Well, again, it matters because
okay,
if you actually look at the Jewish understanding, the term pharaoh just refers to any ruler of Egypt. Whereas if you look at the Egyptian understanding, it refers to a specific ruler of Egypt.
No, you got it wrong. The Jewish it does not mean any ruler of Egypt. It means any Egyptian ruler. What is the difference? The difference. No, there's a difference between saying a ruler of Egypt and an Egyptian ruler. There is a difference. The difference is if the word pharaoh coincides with the religion of Egypt, the religion and the practices that the people followed. The word pharaoh goes within their religion, because why? A pharaoh is someone within the Egyptian religion that takes themselves to be the son of Ra. That's why even when you see the story of Moses, you see this idea of the God of, God Ra, Lord Ra, Lord Ra. A pharaoh is someone who believes themselves to be the incarnation of Ra. So when you talk about an Egyptian ruler, the reason why it's an Egyptian ruler is because that Egyptian ruler follows the religion of Egypt, which is what we call Egyptian mythology. So that is different from a king. You want to know why? Because a king can refer to the king of Egypt can be someone who's not Egyptian. And historically, this makes sense because historically there was this group of Semitic people called the Hyksos who actually ruled Egypt for about 100 years. And these people, they were not Egyptian, but they were the king at that time. He was not Egyptian, but he was the king of Egypt. Because why? Now, that's why it goes back to the difference between saying I'm the king of Egypt versus I'm an Egyptian king. If I'm an Egyptian king, that means I follow the people, or I follow a particular religion from Egypt. If I'm just the king of Egypt, it opens the door for me to be a non-Egyptian king of Egypt. And that's the difference. So Pharaoh does not mean just a political term. It's political and theological. And that's why if it's really from God, it would have to have known the difference, especially when it comes to a matter of theology, because that is the case.
100%. Just quickly on this comment, Zach says, Al-Yemeni, you are wrong. Read Exodus 3:15 in Hebrew. So I want you to bear in mind what I said. I said when God introduces himself and gives the name, his personal name to the prophet, it's never Yahweh. The personal name that he gave to Moses was Ehye, Eshye, Ehye, or Ehye. Now, what's interesting about verse 15 is that he tells him, tell the Israelites, Yahweh, God of your forefathers. Now, why can that not make sense? It can't make sense because the name Yahweh was never revealed to Abraham or any of the patriarchs, right? That name, as Brother Fawad mentioned earlier, Exodus 6:3, it affirms that the patriarchs never knew him by this name. So why would God say to Moses, introduce me to the Israelites by a name of your patriarchs, which they didn't know? It doesn't make any sense. Right? So it's not just about the reading the text. We have to understand what is at the end of the day. You're speaking to a panel of Muslims who are examining the text, and we're doing it in the same way that we do it with the Quran. In the Quran, the reason we believe in it is because it makes sense. Right? That's one of the reasons. Right? So it's not just about reading the text. Okay, we have to look at the text, look at how it relates with other verses that pertain to the same thing, right? The name, and it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. So, but if you've got something else to say, come on, we can discuss it.
Yep. I think there's another question that I hope Sheldon can enlighten us on. Sheldon, when you say that you believe in the Old Testament, which of the sources do you accept as the authentic or authentic text, or the text that should be relied upon? Is it the Septuagint, the Masoretic text, the Samaritan, the Peshitta, Dead Sea Scrolls? Where do you make the where do you draw the line?
What do you mean, like draw the line? In
like if there is a disagreement, because there are disagreements between the texts, not in the ones that we just analyzed as much, nothing significant, but there are other places where there are disagreements. Where would you draw the line, or you don't care?
Well, I don't really have I would. So if there was a disagreement, I would lean more towards whichever text is the oldest. But I wouldn't really throw away any text. I would just try to compare.
So which text is the oldest, Sheldon? Which text is the oldest?
I believe the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The Dead Sea Scrolls? You are aware that the Dead Sea Scroll contains some books which are not currently in the Bible?
I am aware of that.
Okay, so why do you not take them as authentic?
Well, I'm not a scholar, so
ask him this. And Sheldon,
let's keep it to let's try and keep it to Genesis 1 and 2. Let's keep it to Genesis
exactly.
Anyway, let's just something to think about, Sheldon. Because at times it's just claims without evidence. We just want you to think through this. Anything else you want to discuss?
I'm sorry?
Anything else that you want to bring up, or do we have anybody else in the back chat?
Yes, there was one more thing. Is towards the end of the stream, you were trying to make the Torah appeal to, or Genesis at least, appeal to science for some reason. I'm just curious.
That is literally not what I said.
What was his question, brothers? I couldn't.
He said that they try to make the Genesis narrative appeal to science. What I said is that there's errors within the creation.
That's what you said.
Okay.
But you
So
were,
then,
so just to clarify my
no problem,
statement,
go ahead.
that's
Go ahead.
not. I didn't mean to say that that's what you said, but more so that's what you implied by trying to. Because I believe you started by saying that there were scientific inaccuracies, and that's the thing. If you're trying to bring something down based on the fact that it has scientific inaccuracies, then you're basically saying that it can't be true unless it appeals to science. Otherwise, why would you use science as a criteria?
No, that's not necessarily true. So when I speak about,
so if it doesn't need to appeal to science, why would you use science as a criteria?
I got you, bro. 1 second, because you made a claim. You said that something can't be true if it doesn't appeal to science, but that's not necessarily true. When a book that is said to be divine makes statements regarding the natural world, okay, not about supernatural phenomena, and we both agree that natural sciences cannot prove supernatural. So, like, for instance, there's many things within the Bible that speak about the unseen. I'm not saying that that's wrong because it doesn't appeal to science. When a divine book makes statements about the natural world, okay, it is, and it's not like poetic or metaphor, or like, it's not poetic or allegorical, which it's not, because it's literally a story about what happened. If there are inaccuracies in that, then that is an argument. And so it's an argument against the divine inspiration, that there are errors, right? So go on, respond.
So just to clarify, your argument is that if something claims to be divinely inspired but goes against science, it's wrong?
Yeah, in the sense that if it says something which is scientifically inaccurate and it's a divinely inspired book, like you hold to the belief that Old Testament is divinely inspired. But if it says something which is incorrect scientifically, then yeah, it questions the divine inspiration, because a being who is omniscient would not reveal to us statements which are contradictory.
Okay, I believe there are a couple of problems with that. So, do you believe that science is divinely inspired?
What?
What?
So,
Sheldon?
Sheldon,
Do you want to rephrase
Sheldon,
that?
in a nutshell, Sheldon, let's take this from the top, okay? Science is studying the natural world, the physical natural world. It's the whole study of it. Now, when it comes to God, God is the creator of the natural world. There are some things about the natural world that we know, that God has given us the capacity to know, and there are things about the natural world that God has not given us the capacity to know, right? Now, in terms of the things that God gave us the capacity to know and understand, that within itself, God can, that within itself, it can't be contradictory to any book, to any book where it claims to be from God that says otherwise. For example, one of the things that we have given the capacity to understand about the physical world that we're living in is the fact, let's just say something very, very kid level, very, very basic, right? And I'm just giving you an example, just a straight up example, all right? Let's say we have an octopus, right? What we would say about an octopus, we can understand that an octopus has 8 tentacles, right? Now, any book where that claims to be from God, and someone's got to go. Any book that claims to be any book at all that claims to be from God that says octopuses have 10 tentacles, that's a contradiction. That will go against what we have understood. That actually will go against the natural world reality. So this is what we're referring to, meaning if there are things that we have understood about the natural world that we're living in, not saying we understand everything, but the things that we have understood about the natural world of which we're living in, if this book that claims to be from God goes against that, or says something that is been proven to be incorrect, then you'd have to question, is this authorship really from God? Because God should know about the natural world, because he's the creator of it.
Like the simplest example, like in Genesis 1, where it actually alludes to the idea that moon has its own light. Now, do you actually, as a person living in the 21st century, do you actually believe that the moon has its own light? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, so you basically believe something totally the opposite of your Bible. So that's what we were saying. Now the Quran
Well, I
goes
wouldn't
out.
really say it's the opposite, though.
How is it not the opposite? The Bible says
Well, the Bible
that
uses a lot of figurative language, so when it says that the moon has its own light, you
but
can't always
when it's
take
talking
it
about
literally.
creation, it's not figurative, right? Because it literally tells you, especially in Genesis 1, how creation was done. On the other hand, the Quran goes out of its way to correct and says that the moon has a reflective light. It borrows light from the sun. We know this from science.
It's a metaphorical light.
See, so because you cannot switch back and forth between metaphor when you cannot reconcile the issues. You cannot say, oh, it's just metaphorical. No, you can't do that, because you would have to actually look at the context. That's how we can tell. If something like that is mentioned in Psalm, I know that Psalm is actually, it's a rhetoric, it's poetic language. It uses that. That's fine. But Genesis 1 is not using that type of language at all. It's not using figurative language there at all. It's all literal.
Yeah. Muhammad Latif, yeah, we know her name's Francesca something. We're aware of her. We were speaking about her.
Oh yeah, her.
So we're aware of who you're speaking about. But the thing is, and by the way, guys, I mean, if you're in the chat, obviously we have guests on. We want to try and address them as much, rather than focus on what's happening in the chat. If you do have contentions, come on, let's talk about them. It's more fruitful, because then it's one-to-one. Okay, I say one-to-one. There's 5 of us, but we can explore these subjects, and of course we give you enough time to respond and make your case adequately. So please do that. But just to quickly, this is the last time I'm going to address Zach, because obviously we can't just keep looking at the chat. Again, we are talking about when God gives the name to the people, right? We acknowledge that the name Yahweh is throughout the Old Testament, but the name given to the prophets, we have to ask ourselves, why is that name not being used by the people? That's the name given to the prophets, and that's the name given to the people. So why is it the name of a pagan god that is actually propagated throughout the text? And as Muhammad Latif alluded to, in terms of the scholar, her name's Francesca. She's actually I don't know how to pronounce her last name, so I'm not even trying.
I'm getting sick and tired of this. I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna pronounce her last name, but
okay, well, try and pronounce her last name so people know who she is. And and she's done extensive study on this, on the subject of Yahweh and how it's a pagan god based on Near Eastern tradition.
And Yemeni, we should not ignore the fact that it's not the first time they have done it. They did that with Baal as well.
Baal,
so yeah.
But again,
I got it.
Yeah, go on,
Francesca Stavrokopoulou. Got it.
Put that in the chat. Put it in the chat for everyone to have a look at. I'm not even gonna try.
Stavrokopoulou. I got it. Bro, I spent time trying to
say that 3 times fast.
Stavrokopoulou.
Yes.
I got it. There we go.
Stavrokopoulou. What do you call it? I'll put it in the chat for everyone to have a look. So this is the name of the scholar, Francesca Stavrokopoulou. Yeah, actually, that's actually how you would say it, Stavrokopoulou. Yeah. So have a look at her. I mean, she has very compelling evidence with regards to the name Yahweh, and it actually, again, emphasizing the whole different traditions and even changing the identity of God and how he operates. as Fawad mentioned in the presentation. One is from afar. Elohim is doing things from afar, whereas Yahweh is more personal. So the people actually, the people that, you know, why you see especially Christians appeal to, you know, this close nature, right? This close relationship is because that's the way Yahweh is portrayed, not Elohim. Elohim is not portrayed in that way. So they hold on to this character that is introduced to us in Genesis 2:4 onwards.
And I implore people to pay attention to the terminologies that I even pointed out, that they actually use, that are specifically used only in the priestly source, which is where Elohim is used, right? Now that same terminology is only, you know, used for God. But then in Genesis 2, it uses common type of terminology that you would use for even common human beings.
Yeah. And the thing is, as well,
and
you know, like, hold on.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just with this comment, Francesca's stuff. Look, it says suspect bookseller. I mean, every single scholar will have books that they sell. I mean, are you going to say that any scholar that disagrees with your stance is just someone that creates books just to sell? I mean, have some like integrity.
Respect their.
Are you going to apply that to Christian scholars?
Respect their scholarship, seriously.
And hold on a second. What do you mean? Don't pronounce that again? Like, was my pronunciation? Like, was it that bad?
Well,
okay, you agree. Okay, you agree.
So I would say this, and even for us, because today, even for my approach, I use more commonly. Ask yourself, why do we use the Mesopotamian religion? Why is that? Because was that the only religion were those the only people out there? No, there were the Hittites, there were the Egyptians, there were there were other empires, there were other people that had common understandings, but we focus strictly on the Mesopotamians. Now, why is that? Because of the evidence. The evidence shows not only from an internal critique about what's actually in their story of creation that that we have today, that we can do is translated and we have everything, but also within the Bible itself. And we read some parts about we read it in the Bible how they had contact with those people because they conquered them. It's not a claim. It's not an opinion. It's something that it's stated within history and within the scripture itself. That's why we say, you know what, let's use that because that gives more evidence. And then that's why even when I was I read the first 20 verses or the first 20 sentences from there, and you guys can see there is a correlation, there is a understanding of how the approach is, although a polytheistic one, but still an understanding as a whole. And when you look at those evidences and the fact that it's without a doubt they were exposed to the influences of the oppressors of the Babylonians, and on top of that, there are no extant manuscripts that go back to the dating of when the Babylonian exile was said to have taken place, when the Assyrian conquering of the Northern Kingdom was supposed to have been taking place. Even these things coincide. Now, at the end, if you want to say, well, I still say it is, then you can no longer say it's a historical argument. All you can do now is say it's a theological one. Like, for example, Sheldon, Sheldon's still here. If you say that you believe the Bible goes back to Moses, you can't say that's a historical argument anymore. That's a historical claim anymore. All you left by saying is you can say I believe a theological one. Then okay, khalas, you are entitled to whatever you want to believe in. But don't say anymore that it's something that's coincides with history, because the overwhelming evidence for this, even from an internal critique to an external critique, is on quote unquote our side. Especially since the fact that we're just going through Genesis 1 and 2, from the priestly source to the Yahweh source to the Enuma Elish that we have today. And by the way, predates Not only does the cuneiform tablet of which the Elish is on, it predates the Babylon exile. Even it's around the time of like the 9th, 10th century BC. But the story, the Elish, the scholars that say that the tablets actually goes back to even before Moses was said to have existed, meaning it goes back before the around the 14th, 15th century, 14th, 15th century BC. So these are things that has been discovered. So they can't say, well, what if they copied it from the Jews? They couldn't have, because theirs came first, and that's been proven. So every which way you look at it, internally, externally, looking at the contact, the evidence historically goes in our side, quote unquote.
Yeah. The thing is I like this comment as well.
Yeah, I wanted you to point that out.
The thing is, it's what do you call it? The reality
What
is,
did he say?
sorry. So Yahya is saying Dot's connected to Islam. She's a controversial scholar, claimed that Moses didn't exist, and that the authors of the Bible are men with daddy issues. The thing is, he's right. That is her view.
Yeah.
Because she's a feminist, and she tries to incorporate that within her scholarship. But of course, we ignore that because we're like, we don't give a damn about your feminist vibes.
Let them know.
Yeah, we just what do you call it? We deal with the facts.
Yeah, it's.
I mean,
see,
and by the
Yemeni,
way,
like this is the part that yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I apologize, but saying that someone believing that Moses did not exist, I mean, ask yourself, is there an outside the Bible and the Quran? What is the evidence that Moses existed? There is
none.
Zero.
There's none.
So somebody saying that I don't believe Moses existed. Oh, so I mean,
it's a legitimate view. It's a legitimate view.
Exactly.
Yeah. Here's the thing.
Because you have to understand where they're coming from. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
She's an atheist scholar. She will actually say that it is based on her research outside of the biblical studies. She cannot find any reference to such an influential character like Moses that actually, 1/3 of the population actually goes away from Egypt, right? And the inconsistencies and the like ahistorical things that that we talk about, right? It is based on that how could you have somebody so influential, that takes away 1/3 of the population, right? And there's absolutely no historical records of it. That's why, if like, I don't know, how many have you seen like the old movie, the Ten Commandments, the original one,
Charlton
right?
Heston, yeah.
Exactly. So if you actually remember, now in the Bible, I don't think it actually says that, where Pharaoh actually says that let Moses' name be blotted out from every historical record or whatever, right? But in the movie, he goes out of his way and he says this. Why? Because they figured this was an issue. This was a problem, that why is Moses not mentioned anywhere at all? So they even like, I found that very interesting in the movie. He actually says this.
And real quick, also another evidence is that the Egyptian empire did not collapse, because remember, slavery is not something that's a moral issue. It's also a political one, an economic one. So if you're literally having all this free labor, that becomes the backbone of your entire empire or your nation to begin with. Hint, hint, America, but that's another story. So if you're literally all of a sudden you are millions of slaves, millions of free labor, all that is just instantly gone, then that literally destroys your whole economic system, your empire, your trading. That goes with everything, your production, every single thing. The simple fact that even historically, because the pharaoh that has been linked to Moses in the Exodus is Ramses II. The simple fact that after in his later years, there's a whole, I forgot where it was, there's a whole monument. It was one of the 7 wonders of the world, dedicated to Ramses II after the Battle of Kadesh. So you're asking, wait, he just lost all these slaves, but yet he's got the money, he's got the time, he's got the influence to build all this. historically, this goes against this narrative. So it's not far-fetched to say that when looking at it from a political aspect of it. And on top of that, well, of course she's an atheist, so obviously she does not believe this. But on top of that, you have millions of people walking in the desert. Archaeologists say it's almost that's almost impossible to have no traces of them, not even historically, but no archaeological, no footprints, no things that they dropped, nothing.
It's 6 million, right? 6 million people or 2 million?
3 million.
3 million. But if you take all the cattle and livestock and everything else that was there, like we're talking about this number is just
I think it's just the 3 million men. I think that's all it refers to.
No. There's about 600,000 men or something.
Okay.
And they project from it men, women, old people, and everything.
Okay.
Across that, right?
Yeah, if every man has a woman and one child, and it's triples that.
Yeah, and then the livestock, right? So you're talking about numbers that you wouldn't find in some of the largest cities in the world at that time, right? We're talking about a whole nation moving, right? Now that doesn't make sense. The Quran does not talk about it in those same words. Plus, when we're looking at this, right, who was the greatest pharaoh in all of the Egyptian dynasties?
Ramses
II, right? You're telling us that Ramses II survived after this, and all of his greatest achievements that came at the end of his lifetime, right? They happened after Egypt lost this many people.
Yep.
How does that even make economic sense? Now, think of it in modern terms. Just think about it, that we have a brain drain.
1 and 2, by the way.
Sorry.
Yeah, we need to get back. We need to get back to that.
We need to get back.
All right, let's finish this up.
Finish the point, and then we'll get back to Genesis 1 and 2.
So just want to point out that in modern terms, the countries that are progressing, right, that hold the economy, are the ones that allow people to come to their into their economies, and the countries that are developing are the ones that allow people to leave, right? So there's a net move away from those economies into the economies that are there. So that's why it's an important factor. How many people do you have? Are you taking in people, or are you letting people go? That's an important factor of how good your economy does.
Yeah, 100%. But this tangent, of course, is because we were speaking about Francesca's stuff.
Yeah, he has to be blamed.
Let me just point something out about her. Like, here's the deal. If we did not have the Quran as a guide for us, we would not believe in Musa. We would not believe in Dawood. We would not believe in Ibrahim, right? And none of them. We wouldn't believe in them. Right? We would actually come to the same conclusion. Maybe Adam and Eve, we can probably arrive to with the idea that yes, there has to be two, the first two, right, for humankind to exist, right? But for the rest of them, no way. Okay, because there's no historical evidence. And we're seeing somebody who's being true to the evidence that she's been given as, and she's speaking truthfully about what she thinks the evidence is leading to. So we should appreciate that. At the same time, we don't have to agree with her conclusions, because she's not looking at all the evidence. She's starting with, and we've had this discussion a number of times, that when you start with the presupposition that this is going to be that there's no knowledge other than naturalistic way of arriving at it, you'll come to these type of conclusions. So
see, Yemeni, this is why I stopped going to Dots Connected streams.
See?
Just because of Faisal and Ali.
You know what? I remember, man, the last stream, these guys left me alone. I said, I don't think the brothers like me anymore. Like, what is it?
Oh, you figured it out?
It's about time, right? It's like, doesn't he not get it?
So Sheldon, I mean, we've spoken extensively, and you've been listening patiently, and you've actually absorbed the information that we've been providing. You haven't been listening for the sake of listening, which we appreciate, and you've been honest for the most part, with yourself. But isn't this cause for you to think on your position after all that's been presented in a cohesive manner? Because of obviously, at the end of the day, what we aim to do in these streams is bring not so much the totality, but bring the pieces of the puzzle to the table and build the picture for you from what we have in terms of primary material as well as secondary material pertaining to the history, the theology, the language, the traditions. Isn't this a cause for you to think?
Yes, it is.
Good. Anything else you want to discuss? I mean, there's no one else backstage, so if there are other things that you want to discuss, get clarification on, or even challenge, by all means.
So Sheldon, if you want to talk about the Elish or any of the claims or the positions that I had, did you have did you have a good understanding about that, or is there certain things that you still don't get yet?
Understanding about what?
My approach, the Enuma Elish.
So it's basically Enuma Elish actually predates your Tanakh, right?
Yeah.
And when you read the creation account, it is very similar to Genesis creation account. So how do you actually explain that? What do you think of that?
Well, I would have to look at the entire text to see how exactly similar they are.
Well, okay, if you don't mind putting up the link again, we could just read the first 20 verses again.
But I mean, Ali, we can do that. But given if what Ali said is true, even though you didn't pay attention to it, how would you explain that? Because we can substantiate our claim. That's no problem at all.
Sorry, could you rephrase your question?
I said, how would you explain these similarities?
Not too sure. I wouldn't. I guess I don't think I would be able to come up with a good way to explain them. I don't really, not really the type of guy that goes into the history of text. I more so focus on the content.
Would you see that as problematic, though? Like,
I would, if I couldn't find a solution to it after doing enough research, then yes, I would.
But a solution. Look, Sheldon. I mean, we've been through this drill so many times, right? We tell you something, you have no answer, and we appreciate your honesty. Instead of giving an ad hoc response, you actually say, "Okay, I'm gonna go and research." But then you just sort of like shove it under the rug, and either it never gets discussed, or you point out, a French scholar or something that you may have read online, or you quickly Google it, right? I mean, yes, there have been apologists that have tried to reconcile these issues, but we're telling you, Sheldon, this is your salvation you're talking about, right? This is not something small. This is not a conspiracy theory or something, right? I mean, how could you depend your salvation on a text that has over 1,500 years or 2,000 years gap, right? No extant manuscripts, no oral tradition going back, no chain of narration, and these people have been proven to have corrupted their texts.
Yeah.
Your church fathers say this, the Bible itself is a testament to this. Ali pointed out 2 Kings, Nehemiah.
Jeremiah.
It's quite clear.
Jeremiah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, you have a 2,000, or let's be generous. You have an 1,100 year history of a non-existent text from the removed from the source, and then when we finally receive the text, we still have missing text, and the text that does exist is corrupted and has influences of pagan traditions. And we like we mentioned, we've broken down what the Torah is in the previous stream, and now we're looking at its contents and its history in more detail, and we'll be doing this for the entirety, for all 38 books. The next stream is going to be on just Genesis 3. There's a lot to unpack on Genesis 3. right? And the thing is, you know, for if anyone thinks that, oh, we're just here to do this with the Bible, you know, I've already advertised on my channel, we're going to be looking at the Quran in the exact same way, you know. So whether you do come to challenge this particular stream or not, you're very welcome to look at the Quran, because at the end of the day, we don't care about, oh, you can't look at the Quran unless you've answered about the Bible. That doesn't matter to me, right? What matters is that the message of the Quran reaches you and you understand it, and that when we are looking at this, we can see that the Quran is actually saving you from the adulterated tradition that has infiltrated the text that you hold to, and asking you, you know, give the Quran its due right, you know, because you will believe what the Quran says pertaining to God than what the Old Testament, and you've already testified to that with, you know, with regards of, you know, Allah not needing to rest at all. You have to agree with the Quran. You can't agree with the Old Testament, and you can't reconcile Rashi's attempt to explain this. So inshallah, you know, like I said, you know, we appreciate the honesty and everything, but you have to be sincere with yourself. People can be honest all day long, but if there's no sincerity, then, you know.
Like, I want Sheldon to just imagine, right, being a Muslim, you would never have to wrestle with any of these issues. See, it's a complete way of life. Anybody, even like polemically, cannot argue against Islam, subhanAllah, right? We're not the most knowledgeable bunch over here, you know. With our limited research, we're able to point these things out, and the biggest scholars have not been able to, you know, reconcile these issues, right? Or polemicists, I mean, right? They just give you an ad hoc response, or response that is not really satisfactory at all.
Yeah, you guys bring up pretty good points.
But may Allah guide you, Sheldon. Like, look, you've been around, and I've seen, like, you know, I've sort of witnessed Sheldon's journey, right? In the beginning, he used to come off really obnoxious, you know, on certain streams, but he's been really humble for quite a while, you know. And yeah, alhamdulillah, may Allah guide him to truth, you know.
Ameen.
And you know what I actually really appreciate about Sheldon, by the way, and I've said this to some of the other brothers as well, I think, that he goes out of his way and he points out, I'm not going to name anybody, but you guys know who those people are, that he does not agree with the Christian approach, how they speak about Islam or our Prophet, peace be upon him, or the Quran, you know. So like, and that's exactly what Brother Faisal was saying before we actually got on the stream, that some of the Christian apologists, even though we may have theological debates with them, but they're respectful, right? And we appreciate these respectful conversations. You know, at the end of the day, we can shake hands and can say, you know, okay, let's agree or disagree. But the respect, it's extremely important.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, not to say that things get heated at times, and that's fine. I mean, but at the end of the day, Sheldon's, we've always had respectful conversation, and we've disagreed, and we've had heated arguments as well on that. So do you want to
be blamed for most of those?
I mean, I've lost my patience with Sheldon as well. Don't worry. But we're getting old, Fawad. Like,
exactly.
Do we want to bring in the Muslims as well?
Muslims,
in case.
No, yeah, I mean, you know, there are no non-Muslims.
I mean, they're scared. They don't have anything to say.
This is shocking. You see, like, they sit over there in comments just yapping all day long. Like, look at so many Christians just messaging. Why don't they come up on stage? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, you know? I mean, this is the whole purpose. We do the research. We present them a holistic picture of what is happening in the text, and we connect the dots, right? It's not a pun or anything. It's just literally what we do. But you know, we connect everything together to make sure, and it all ties up. to show them that we are not simply bringing things and then when you scrutinize it, it falls apart and it's inconsistent. We show how everything holds together, you know, biblically, extra biblically, through the language, you know, everything. And subhanallah, and you know, you know, you guys, you don't see how things are done behind the scenes. It's not like we sit together and we do the research together. No, each person goes away and does their research individually, and we meet up, you know, once a week, and we say, okay, what have we got, you know, and we play devil's advocate. We look at each other's work, and we're like, what if someone says this? What if someone says that? What if they try and reconcile it this way? What? And this is why, like, for example, when Sheldon came on and he presented Rashi, we know what Rashi says. We've gone through, we've asked the question, we've looked at it, right? At some point in our lives, not necessarily during our research, but we've looked at it at some point in our lives and asked ourselves the question, does the Jewish reconciliation hold up? Yes or no? If it holds up, fair enough. It's no longer a contradiction, right? We are fair. We're, you know, us as Muslims, we are taught to be fair, even if it's against ourselves, right? So we're not going to deny the things that are there. You know, we could have sat here and said, oh, look, you know, the textual tradition is just messed up. You know, there's so many differences in the manuscripts, but no, right? In fairness, the text of Genesis 1 and 2, what remains of it is fairly intact. There's one scribal error, right? As mentioned by Faisal, he saw one scribal error.
Well, there are probably 3 or 4, but none of them have any significance. Yeah. By the way, there's this comment from BMW 335 somewhat earlier. No. Earlier he was talking about, if it's so far from Moses and Jews have oral traditions of memorizing Torah by age 10, and you see that most of Quran stories are biblical stories, what does that tell you? So he's putting that question up.
Right, here it is. Okay.
Yeah.
If it's so far from Moses and Jews, and Jews do have oral tradition of memorizing Torah by age 10, and you see the most of Quran stories are biblical stories, what does that tell you? See, this is the thing. Most of the Quran stories are not biblical. This is what people actually fail to see. They think that because we have the names of the prophets and stuff, they think that we have a lot of the stories. We actually have very, I mean,
even the names are different.
I mean,
and I don't
bring that. I don't like to bring that.
I don't think BMW understood what we were saying and what we were not saying, right?
Well,
I was very clear on that part, right? That we're not saying that they're copying from other places. What we're saying is that we can see the influence show in there, right?
Yeah.
Yes, they may have started from the same point as we Muslims are, which is divine revelation. But we can see the corruption happening, and the final product is what you have right now. Okay, and when you compare it to what has been revealed later on and is the truth from God, right, you can start seeing that there is corruption, and what that corruption is. We're able to tell you because we have the Quran. You're unable to even comprehend that there is corruption in there, and your scholars are aware that these texts are corrupt. That's why a lot of the scholars who do a deep study of the text leave the religion.
And it's not just that. I think it came in late, because I did mention earlier, I was like, well, you know, someone is going to ask this question of the double standards. If we say that, you know, the Old Testament has borrowed or been influenced by other traditions, and that's why we see the pagan traditions infiltrating it, why not the Quran when you see earlier sources that the Quran takes from or supposedly takes from? And why that's not a double standard is because we see the history aligning with the Jews being present with the people at the time that they would have had that, like the Mesopotamian period and the cuneiform text. They would have been there at the time. So they would have had access to a language that is now extinct, but at the time, and they would have incorporated it in. Whereas when they say that the Quran, you know, was borrowing or copying stories from other scriptures, it's from, texts and traditions that are either extinct or not being relayed by the Jews and the Christians. Because the Jews especially, they were not people that would go around telling people about their tradition. That's not what they do. They keep it to themselves because they think they are the only ones chosen by God to have this religion. The Christians, how much of the Quran actually speaks about the Christian narrative? Not very much at all. How much of the New Testament is actually in the Quran? None, right? Very little, right? Very little. The virgin birth, again, the fact that he's called the Messiah, just little things like that, but key doctrinal things.
Or even the miracles, Akhi. Some of the miracles that come from Homer and Greek mythologies, right?
Yeah.
The Quran, why doesn't the Quran mention that? The Quran mentions other miracles, but why not this particular one? Him walking water, turning water into wine, stuff like this. This comes from Homer and the Greco-Roman mythologies.
Yeah,
exactly. So subhanallah. So this is what we want you to guys to think. The whole concept of the Islamic dilemma does not exist. It's a phantom thing that has been created by popular Christian apologists in order to attempt, because they've lost the battle of trying to defend the Bible as it is. So they needed to try and use the Quran to affirm the Bible for their own sanity, as well as try to use it to, trick weak Muslims to follow what they follow, right? This is the tactic. But us as Muslims, we've already destroyed the whole, Islamic dilemma thing. If anything, it's a Christian dilemma, right? It's not an Islamic dilemma. It's a Christian dilemma, because it's the Christians that have to actually reconcile, because they claim to follow a tradition of the Jews, but they contradict most of it, right? They contradict most of it. And today, what we've done with Genesis 1 and 2 is actually give evidence of that. Well, inshallah, what we'll do is bring Muhammad on. He's been waiting for a while. Muhammad, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
That is loud.
That is loud. How you doing, Akhi?
I'm doing good. I wanted to ask, does it mention Adam being put on earth in Genesis 1 and 2?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
They don't believe, Akhi, what you have to understand, a lot of Muslims actually don't know this. It's a good question. They don't believe that Adam and Eve, they were in paradise before, and then they were kicked out and they were sent to earth, right? They actually believe that Adam and Eve, they were on earth, and the earth was referred to as the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
The Garden of Eden is on earth. Yeah, that's what they're
exactly. Is that clear?
Yeah, and was the earth created at the same time as Adam, or was it there before?
Before. So if you actually, so this is what I was trying to point out. If you actually look, did you watch the presentation from the beginning?
Not from the beginning.
Oh, okay. Then you would have to watch it from the beginning, because we mentioned how Genesis 1, Genesis 2, they're contradictory accounts, they're inconsistencies. In one it says man was created first and vegetation was created later. And another one, it says vegetation was created first and man was created, or the other way around. I don't know. Did I say that correct? Right? But, so they're internal inconsistencies. So check that out. Inshallah, it'll be beneficial for you.
Okay.
And I'll add on by saying this, okay. So in the biblical narrative in Genesis about Adam and Eve, there's this concept of they're on earth as a punishment. The fact that they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden because of their quote unquote sin, which, by the way, it never says God forgave them. They didn't Adam and Eve did not ask for forgiveness in the Bible, nor did God.
That comes later, by the way.
Nor did God really forgive them, but like he never says, "I forgive you for what you've done." But
you're jumping the gun, Adi. You're jumping the gun. That's Genesis 3.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's
it
It's in fairness, it's very easy to jump the gun, which actually tells the people we've actually done more research than we should be doing.
The fact when you mentioned about Greek mythology, on the ancient Greek and Egyptian. I was trying my hardest not to go. And remember when I told you, brothers, that I made a huge mistake? That was actually part of it. So,
Yeah, you got carried
yeah.
away and you started incorporating things that you shouldn't have incorporated into the.
Yeah, I went everywhere. So the fact that I had to limit my, but yeah, that was just one of it too.
So
So
1 and 2.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I'll just say this then from Genesis 2, by the way. So even the whole process of how it talks about how men were created from the flesh and in verse 23 it says and this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, she shall be called. So this concept of how men were made actually coincides with the Elish, the Mesopotamian story of creation too, because for one, humans came out of a deity, the blood of a deity, and then this literally the process of how from there then the bones started forming, and then it looked like quote unquote man. In the Elish, it says that because the main deity or named Marduk looked, since he's the king, humans try humans came up in trying to look or in the image, if you want to say, in the likeliness of Marduk. So in the Elish, humans look the exact way Marduk looks. Why? Because they're trying to replace him. So there's this concept of them seeking to rebel against the gods, and that's one of the reasons why Marduk withholds knowledge from humans, because he and the other gods are afraid that, oh wait, they already look like us, let's not give them knowledge, because if we give them knowledge, then they will try to replace us, or they'll try to be like us. So this concept alone of resembling the god or resembling the gods, the key concept coincides with the Elish as well. That's why it's touched upon in Genesis 2.
Oh, Latif, does that help, Akhi?
Yeah.
Right.
What's the other thing?
But watch the. I would like encourage you to watch the presentation from the beginning, because all of us we cover different aspects, right? So I don't know which part you actually started watching the stream from, but in the beginning, like right after DeAndre, when I actually did my presentation, I actually mentioned these things that you're pointing out, by the way.
Do you guys cover the reason given for Adam's creation?
Yes, that's actually mentioned in the slides too.
Inshallah, go back and watch because we spend the first 2 hours of this stream building the case, connecting everything, pointing out the inconsistencies on how the history coincides with what we are saying and the scholarship coincides with what we're saying. So inshallah, look at that, and then of course inshallah you'll have more clarity. Okay.
All right.
By the way, while there's one interesting thing that we actually missed out because there was just so much to cover, and that's the fact that in Genesis 2 the names of everything are given by Adam.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Now this is and the way it is worded is so then the Lord God said, it is not good that that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner. So out of the ground the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all cattle and to the birds of the air and to every animal on the field. But for the man, there was not found a helper as his partner. Now, the reason why I'm bringing it up is because the Quran makes another distinction here, right? When you read Surah 2, Surah Baqarah, verse 31, right? It translates to basically, he taught Adam alayhi the names of all things. Then he presented them to the angels and said, tell me the names of these if what you say is true. This is in continuation of what was happening. So the angels, let me just continue with that. because this is an interesting. They replied, "Glory be to you. We have no knowledge except what you have taught us. You are truly the all-knowing, all-wise." Allah said, "O Adam, inform them of their names." Then, when Adam did, Allah said, "Did I not tell you that I know the secret of the heavens and the earth, and I know what you reveal and what you conceal?"
That would have been one daunting task, man, naming everything.
Yeah, and
Bro.
something you don't know, like
I kid you not. I'm actually trying to I'm trying to write a book right now, and even just one particular book, I'm just to name the characters, everything. It's I ran out of names, so imagine you have to name everything. I cannot imagine that.
What about all the other living organisms? Do they get names?
oh, we don't even name the streets in our neighborhood. We end up naming them the first street, second street, third street.
Exactly. You run out of words,
that's
we
what
go to
we
numbers.
The epitome of American laziness. Can't even
Exactly.
bother naming a street. But yeah. So, and you know, and the thing is, subhanallah, there is something that is actually quite disgusting. Talmud mentions is with regard to, but for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. The Jews actually attribute the most horrific things to Adam with regards to this. I'm not going to mention it because it's just it's too abhorrent to mention. But subhanallah, it just goes to show that, you know, if you are to look at the Jewish tradition with regards to the most honored among, you know, the you know, mankind, they see only the worst in them, which is unfortunate. So this is another issue. Yeah, but Genesis 3, and I think we might, I don't know, we'll discuss it with the brothers, but Genesis 3, we might incorporate 4 into it as well. But I don't know. Yeah, we'll have a discussion about that afterwards and just announce.
By the way, Ahi, somebody pointed out, I don't know if that's a Christian or Muslim, that I would say it's hard to have a conversation as 1 versus 5. So, I mean, we have said this on all of our Dots Connected streams. If you guys want, take your pick. Ask, you know, just one person. The rest of us, we're not going to interject at all.
And the thing is, it's not so much to gang up on you. It's because at the end of the day, there is so much information that we are presenting. It's impossible for one person to internalize it all. So this is why even when we do our opening presentation, we have each person dedicated to a specific subject, a specific piece of the puzzle. And then we bring it together. So when you guys come on, like, so, you know, and you ask the question, if I don't know the answer, which I probably won't, someone else would. And if they don't know the answer to something, I probably know the answer to it. So, you know, the person who's going to be speaking to you is going to be the person who is most suited and equipped to have that discussion with you. It's not going to be like all of us speaking against you and bombarding you with stuff. No, you are the one that's actually going to be, we're going to let you bombard us with the things that you think we got wrong. And then based on each contention that you have, a separate person will speak to you.
Absolutely.
This is only something that makes sense, right? It's impossible. We don't, none of us here are sitting here professing that we you know, we know the you know, from the beginning to the end of everything that we're speaking about. This stuff takes time, it takes dedication, and sometimes we make mistakes on our research. We have to go back on it, look at it again, you know. Sometimes we think we've corrected someone, but they corrected us instead of, you know. So, and this is all happened in the last couple of days as well between us, right? So inshallah, you know, if you are a Christian, if you are a Jew and you feel like you're being ganged up, this is not our intention. All it is that what we have provided you is a panel that is capable of having a conversation with you that can answer the questions that you present. Because if we're going to be doing this stream where it's informative for you and we can't answer the questions, how is it informative? How is it beneficial? I hope you guys understand.
And even if there's something that they point out that we didn't know the answer to, or we don't know the answer to, and we're not going to give an ad hoc response. We will say, you know what, but yeah, we'll do more research on that, and we'll get back to you on that.
Exactly.
So we might actually learn from you guys as well.
100%. Okay, Mohammed, anything else that you want to mention?
I had one more question. Did you guys discuss the level of corruption for like each chapter?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Before, so just want to add something to this, because it's important to understand when we're talking about the level of corruption, we're only able to compare some historical text with another historical text, not really able to compare to the original. So that's an important distinction that we want to, or a caveat that we want to put forth before responding to this.
So, cool. Well, I mean, there's no one else in the back chat. So, do you guys want to call it?
Let's give it a couple of minutes, and then if nobody comes up, we can just
let's allow the Muslims to come in. I mean, this is new information for them as well. Let's see if they have any questions, or they want to ask questions for us. I mean, that
and feedback as
well. By the way, these are things that we're not just going to. Yeah, we have it once a month, but we, Brother Yemeni and that's we have weekly streams. So if there's something that after watching our presentation that you'd want to ask questions about, we have the round table. Brother Yemeni has his streams as well. So you can come ask us, or even something that we can dive deeper into just a little bit more, since we don't really have the time to talk about every single thing that every single research information that we came up with. So these are the things that we could dive deeper into in our own personal streams, or if you guys have questions, come to us on our streams, just ask us. We would not mind whatsoever.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think
we have to at the end of the day, we have to prioritize the information that we present, pertaining to the most important things that the scriptures teach us, which is who God is.
Absolutely. And I think like different people, they give their insights on this particular issue. And I know this for a fact, because like some Christians, they pointed this out as well in chat, right? That they could claim that Genesis has many similarities to the Quranic story of creation. So indirectly, are we implying that the Quran is also taken from those same sources? Will we apply the same standard to the Quran? I think it might be better that we emphasize on that, or elaborate on that point a little bit more as to what we actually meant by it, right? The way I understand it, right? The saying goes that all religions have some truth found in them, and almost all the religions that you see, even the Hindu scriptures, Chinese scriptures, everything, right? Mm-hmm. It lines up perfectly with the Islamic perspective. What is the Islamic perspective, right, of the scriptures given to prophets, or prophets sent to different nations? That every single nation was sent a prophet, and over time they got corrupted. Like Brother Faisal, I think, said earlier, right, that when a new prophet would come, he would it'll be like a reset button for them from God, correcting what they have been, what they've been following wrong, right? And of course, it would line up perfectly with the original teachings. So what we're trying to point out is that the Jews didn't preserve their text, right? And we have provided evidence, internal and external, right? And we clearly see across different manuscripts, which we will dive deeper into in the upcoming streams, because Genesis 1 and 2, there's not much to be found in there in regards to this, right? But across different manuscripts, you can actually clearly see, right, the type of corruption where they have tried to actually eliminate those polytheistic elements, or something that would be difficult for them to explain. There have been online articles about it by Times of Israel and whatnot, right? That I actually shared with Ali yesterday as well, right? They've given a list of examples that how rabbis, they had to correct certain things, right?
That's the whole concept of the tikkun sefarim, the restoration and the correction of the text. Yeah, this is the whole concept. It's a whole field. It's a whole field within Judaism that is undertaken by the rabbis. So when the rabbis talk to you about, you know, Maimonides and the 8th and the 9th principle, as we were discussing, and how we have to believe the Torah is you know, it's intact from when God spoke it and when God described it and when Moses described it again, and everything that we have today is exactly the same as Moses had it. They are straight up lying to you, because the rabbis themselves have a specific sort of contingent called the Tikkun Sefarim, where they are responsible for restoring the text. So they know that they are lying about this.
They could attribute that to, you know, Prophet Ezra, right?
Ezra, yeah.
Yeah. But in actuality, it is actually their rabbis. They did that, right? Because they have actually no proof that it was a prophet that did it.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, do we bring up this comment from Mighty Sarlak? I never implied copied. Only wondered where they got the stories from. This is referring to his earlier statement. So the Quran doesn't mention Moses or Noah, etc. So I think what he's bringing up here is the idea that if the Quran is mentioning Musa alayhi salam, Moses, Noah alayhi salam, Noah, Adam alayhi salam, Adam, Abraham, Ibrahim, where are these coming from, right? That's what we're trying to point out to you. That we believe there is a common origin. They were divine revelation at some point, and then they got corrupted over time. And that's what we're pointing out.
But questions on the Quran, we'll leave them for the Quran streams, because when we're using the Quran in this, it's just to draw this parallel to show people that actually the things that you say about the Quran plagiarizing the Bible, it's not actually plagiarizing, it's responding to the Bible, right? That's what's happening, right? So when people, you know, talk about Gabriel Reynolds and appeal to Gabriel Reynolds, he says what the Muslims say, that the Quran responds, it doesn't plagiarize.
But that guy is too shady, to be honest.
I know he's shady, but in terms from this angle, right? You know, because you know the Christians like to appeal to him these days for some reason, but you know he doesn't agree with them. He agrees with us that the Quran is actually making an active response to the Bible, not actually taking anything from it. I think Gabriel actually goes to the point where he actually doesn't believe that he takes anything from it.
He stated in his book, right? And Brother Dean actually brought it up that according to Gabriel Sayyidurnas, the Quran sees itself as an authority to correct what's in the Bible.
Exactly. There you go.
I'm just paraphrasing here,
Yeah, 100%. So, but anyway, but this is what we're doing, because at the end of the day, we're still giving da'wah, right? This is our fundamental intention. We're speaking to you guys to show you that you don't have what you think you have. Take that which you can be certain of, which is the Quran. And alongside this, we're going to be doing the Quran streams to give you even more certainty that the Quran is something that you can follow. That what we can see in terms of influence on the Old Testament, you see no influence on the Quranic text from any tradition whatsoever. That there is no connection between the Quran and any tradition that was around them or before them.
And you know, this is something that we even pointed out, Akhi, like when we did the stream with Brother John Fontaine, right? That we actually, as Muslims, because of the Quran, obviously, and the Hadith, we affirm these stories to be true. So if there's, you know, these verses in the Bible that could be verbatim, there are a handful of verses that are verbatim that you will find parallels between the Quran and the Bible, right? But they do exist, right? So, could you actually remove this guy? I think, Akhi, it's on your stream.
Which
William
one?
Graves. William Graves.
What's he said?
Just he's using obscene language.
Profanity.
I don't know if it's
Put him on timeout.
Yeah. Okay. So, we do affirm it as the truth, but we don't affirm it as wahi. We don't affirm it as revelation.
Mm.
That's a distinct difference that a lot of even Muslims don't know this. So let's say if the Quran actually says that Moses did something, peace be upon him, right? And the Bible says the exact same thing, right? To the dot. We will affirm the Quran to be the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the same exact verse, verbatim, found in the Bible, we will not say that this is from God Almighty.
Yeah.
We affirm it to be true because there could have been men writing it. But since we don't have a chain of narration, we don't have any proof it going back to the prophets and hence to God Almighty, we don't affirm it to be revelation. That's it's very important to point this out. A lot of people actually don't know this.
Agreed. Okay, well, the thing is, I'm not seeing any Muslims wanting to jump on either. Okay.
Oh boy.
Oh man, awesome.
Let's see.
Fawad, your friend is here.
You know what?
Yeah, my best friend.
I Yemeni. Let's make an exception, okay?
No, what do you call it? No, I'm not doing that. What do you call it? Because it was Fawad that said, let's wait a few minutes.
No. When I say let's make an exception, because it was Fawad that said let's wait a few minutes. It does not matter.
Now you guys have to suffer for my sins.
No. The exception is it does not matter what topic Masihi comes up with. Let's a Fawad answer.
No,
Ali. We gotta keep it on topic. Let's see if Masih can actually.
What I mean topic. I mean the
I'm
historical
game.
manuscripts.
Bring it up.
Okay.
Of course,
Yeah,
Masihi, as I already call it, just don't. Obviously, we brought you up. You got to keep it on topic. Today's discussion is about Genesis 1 and 2. We don't want anything about the Quran talking about following the Messiah and Jesus and all that. None of that stuff.
By the way, did you watch the presentation, Masih?
Actually, I did not. So basically, but you're talking of Genesis 1 and 2?
No. Did you watch the presentation? Do you know what the presentation was about?
No, as I said, I didn't watch it. So
okay, then there's not really much you can comment on or challenge. To be fair,
well, I do know Genesis, and I don't know what's your understanding about Genesis.
But that's the thing. We're not going to go back on a 2-hour presentation that we've given.
Now, what in Genesis when it says, "And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters," how do you take that?
Let me get this.
Did you not?
Let me get this.
I literally explained that.
No, see, this is the thing. Look, Masih, look, for the sake of time, okay, if you want, go back on what we have discussed on our first 2 hours where we laid out our case, where everything was explained. And inshallah, if you want to challenge it, you can come on another stream that either myself or the brothers are doing and challenge things.
This is what I'll do. Okay, go back and listen to the presentation that I did on Spirit of God. I explained it. If you want to challenge on any of the streams that Dissected are doing, I'd be happy to entertain your objections.
Certainly.
You know what?
Can you tell me in 2 words?
No.
What is the Spirit of God? The Spirit hovering over the waters?
Masihi. Again, like the brother said, we're not going to go back and redo our whole presentation like each of us did, because each of us added our own thing to it. So what you can do is this: after go back to the
as Yemeni said, I'll go back.
As you know, Masih, and as you know, we have the roundtable coming up on Friday, right? So if you want to come to the roundtable after you watch the presentation and you have certain questions that we can answer, that's no problem. But if you're going to ask those questions on Friday, keep it only to Genesis 1 and 2, because you're not going to watch. 1 second. You're not going to listen to the presentation, come on Friday, and then talk about the Quran. No,
I will go and look at the presentation.
And then
keep it. Will Yemeni be there?
By the way, Masih,
I won't be there on Friday. I have I have research to do for our Quran streams on Friday. So
when will you be having your other stream?
I will be streaming on Saturday.
So I'll join you on Saturday because when you go to the round, they don't let you speak much, So.
No, we won't.
No,
because you hardly stay on
correct.
topic. Anyway, Masi, here's a question. Here's a question to you. Right?
Go
we
ahead.
did discuss the historicity of the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you think you can trace the Old Testament back to Moses? Is it the divine revelation that was revealed to Moses?
Well, I would say that you have to find the chain. And if you look at the chain, it does link to Moses, of course.
Okay, so what's the change? We've been waiting for that. Can you tell us?
I'm actually not ready to discuss that because I need to give you references and all the other stuff which I don't have.
Then why did you jump on?
No, okay. Basically, I just wanted to come and talk to you guys about what's going on, but I'll join you guys later,
Yeah, when you see Fawad next time by himself, have that conversation. What's going on?
Oh yeah, you know what? Masi, as a matter of fact, when you come on a Friday, and we talk about this, it's gonna be you and Fawad. And honestly, the brothers, we might get off stage and just let you go ahead.
I'll send him my WhatsApp. No worries.
No,
oh come on! I wanted to annihilate his Spirit of God argument.
No, let DeAndre deal with it but at the end of the day, look, Masiih, at the end of the day, the brothers have given you their word that if you do join them, they will let you speak about this topic, right? So they're not gonna do whatever you're gonna accuse them of doing. And if they do, right, and at the end of the day, they might slip up, right? They're human beings. If they do slip up and start interrupting you and stuff, remind them of their promise. Okay?
Okay, fair enough.
Hold them to account. Yeah, hold them to account like you hold me to account. Okay?
We just
we just asked.
I just want to make sure.
Oh, so sorry, Aki. Masi, we just asked that when you come on Friday, just keep it on topic. That's it. That's all we ask.
So you're talking about the topic is going to be Genesis?
Genesis 1 and 2.
Genesis 1 and 2, that's it.
Genesis 1 and 2.
Not 20.
Masi, it's a presentation that we did today. You can go back, take a look. Mm-hmm. Let us know what do you think about it. All right. What do you disagree with? That should be fine. But if you're going to jump onto the Quran and want to misrepresent the Islamic scriptures, that's where we're going to draw a line. And our conversation would be over.
Fair enough. I mean, basically, if you can't handle the Quranic truth, then I won't go there. Fair enough. Bye.
That's sneaky. Don't worry.
You had to throw that in there.
Okay, guys. See you.
You'll have your chance with the Quran. You'll have your chance with the Quran.
Okay.
Soon.
See you.
Allah. All right.
I thought it was too good to be true. I thought it was.
They got it.
He had to scratch that itch.
They gotta check it in. Okay. All right. Do you want to wait a couple of more minutes?
Fawad?
No, I think we're good. I think we're good. Yeah. I don't think the Muslims are coming on. Brother Habibi.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are my brethren doing?
Alhamdulillah.
Your brethren are doing fine.
Alhamdulillah.
Fantastic. I just came in to say, you should have quit while you were ahead.
No. If you had quit, you wouldn't have been here, and we would have been. We wouldn't have had your company.
Sounds like a chess game between you and Brother Yemeni.
A chess game, huh?
Wait, did you guys play?
We've played once.
We played once.
Was it just once? I thought it was like. Oh.
No, we played just once, and I nearly beat him. Then I completely messed up, and then I completely messed up at the end. So it was
understatement.
Good.
You know what?
What do you mean understatement? It was true. You even got worried. You even got worried for a bit.
You know what? I want to know this. Ali Yemeni, Habibi, I'm challenging the both of you to a chess match.
Oh, let's do that.
How about this? I have a better idea. I'll do a simultaneous exhibition. I'll play all 5 with you at once.
Oh my God. Nah. See, now
But
you're
I
getting
like
personal.
it.
Now
I
you're
like
getting
All
it.
five
personal.
of us,
Now you're
all
getting
five of us
personal. No,
against
no,
the
no,
one
no,
of
no.
you, or each one of
No.
us individually against you?
No,
Each one of you individually against me on its own board, and I have to play all of them simultaneously.
Brother, what's the like? What's so great about that?
no, that's hard. That's hard to
It's
do.
a
I have
yeah.
to
It's a
No, no,
flex.
five
no.
games
What's
at
so
once.
great
It's a
about
flex.
that, Akhi?
It's a
How
flex.
okay? How easy is it to play one game? I have to play 5 at once.
Nah, he's
Imagine
basically.
you have to do 5 live streams at
I
once.
propose bringing it back to Genesis 1.
Nah, no, because
Yeah,
now
so
he's getting okay. Now he's getting personal with it. Because if he actually does that, okay, I'm gonna take it personally. If he actually manages to win and he's playing 4 other people at the same time, well, you
Five,
okay,
five other people.
okay, what you're basically telling me is you want to fight. Like that's what you're
Yeah.
telling me.
We're gonna
Let's
take
go.
this, brothers and sisters. We're gonna take this fight backstage. So, with that being said,
I told you should have quit while you were ahead.
yeah.
We'll clip it out towards the end.
Inshallah.
No worries.
So yeah,
Just so
inshallah.
you know, by the way, just so
Yeah.
you know, the way DeAndre plays chess is in his head. He doesn't he doesn't use a board.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
So
That's good.
yeah, so he would call it out, and he would have to remember where his pieces are.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I've
Subhanallah.
never played chess in my life.
Oh come
I'll
on,
play blindfolded
DeAndre,
as
you
well
should
to
have
make it
quiet for a while.
Oh no, you just baited him out. Okay. Anyway, right.
Time to end the stream.
Yeah,
All
time
right.
to end the stream. Inshallah, what do you call it? Obviously, as we say, the first Tuesday of every month is when we do this. November, the first Tuesday of November will be our last stream on this topic until February. We take what do you call it? We're going to be taking a winter break with regards to this, and then we'll pick up again. So the first week of November, the first Tuesday of November, we'll
It's
go
the 5th,
through.
the 5th of November.
Yeah. So by
Ooh.
fortnight, we're going to be doing Genesis, either Genesis 3 or 3 or 4. We're going to make that decision between ourselves and let you guys know. So inshallah, please share the stream. We want to have Jews and Christians interact with us because if we are wrong in our research, we want to be pointed out. That's one of the things as well. It's not just to shame people. If we are wrong in our research and people can prove us wrong, then alhamdulillah, it's not a problem. So let us have that interaction. Help us out with that. Share these streams. 12th of October at 8 p.m. we have our first Quran stream, asking the question, as we did with the Torah, what is the Quran? And that will be open for the non-Muslims in general to challenge as well. With that being said, yes, exactly. Actually, not so much hibernation, but we have families, and the winter period is, of course, especially in the West, and we all live in the West. The winter period is when we have a lot of more time off work and things start winding down. So we spend most of the year doing research and da'wah and all, with no funding. We take this time away from our families, so we owe it to our families to give them at least these 2 months, right, where we can dedicate more time to them. At the end of the day, even though da'wah is an obligation upon us, it is not more of an obligation than our obligation to our families. So we have to think about that, and inshallah, of course, whether you guys appreciate it or not, we give a damn. So
Talk to him.
Yeah, so that's the reality, and this is what's going to be happening. The same with the Quran. Me personally, I don't know about the brothers, but me personally, there's not going to be any streams whatsoever between November the 23rd and the end of January. I'll be back in February, inshallah. But it's not like I'm not going to be working out at all on things behind the scenes. But there will be no streams for those 2 months. But yeah,
unless I have something to say about it.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
You know what?
If you want some cats and chess streams, then there will be some streams on Yemenite front.
You know, Al Yemeni. You know what? I couldn't resist. The 5th of November. Remember the 5th of November. Gunpowder, treason, and plot. For there is a reason why gunpowder and treason should never be forgot. Please tell me you know what that is.
What the hell are you talking about, bro?
You know more about Guy Fawkes Knight than I do.
Oh yeah, the Guy Fawkes, basically.
Yeah. I couldn't give a damn. What do they call it?
Bro,
As long as I get to, as long as I get to shoot a Roman candle at someone, that's it.
Bro, it's not even about the his, because I actually did learn about the Catholics and the Protestants in England, but it's more or less the movie V for Vendetta. I love that movie, so
yeah,
that's a cool.
Who doesn't? But yeah. Bye, inshallah. Brothers and sisters, jazakumullah khairan, and for for everyone else who's participated, barakallahu feekum. Thank you for joining. Thank you for participating. And you guys said, what do you call it? Friday, you've got the round table.
Mm-hmm.
So inshallah, guys, tune in for the round table. And myself, I have a stream on Saturday, yet to be determined what it is. But you guys know what I stream on Saturdays anyway. So, yeah, with that being said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان